Decide the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I don't even know how many times I've come to this floor of this Senate to be able to talk about government efficiency. It's not a shock for me to be able to come back here again today and to say, let's talk about this. I don't know a single one of the great 4 million Oklahomans that if I went to their house today, knocked on their door and said, is the federal government the most efficient body in the country, that they would say yes. This should not be a partisan issue, that government should be more efficient. Every single dollar that is spent was taken from an American in tax dollars or was borrowed so that their children would have to pay for it. This should be a straightforward issue. Every single year I put out a federal fumble report, and I'll put one out in a month or so. And when we release that report, everyone nods their head and says, yes, that's areas of inefficiency. And year after year, I highlight things like federal tax dollars that were spent paying for a drag show in Ecuador. If the nice folks in Ecuador want to have drag shows, why are my folks in Oklahoma being forced to pay for them? I highlighted things like we did a research study in Ghana to be able to determine whether helmets made people on bikes in Ghana safer. By the way, I could go ahead and tell you that today without spending any federal tax dollars. Yes, they'll make it safer, but why were the folks in Oklahoma being forced to pay for the study in Ghana to be able to study head injuries on folks in bikes and whether they should wear a helmet? The folks in Oklahoma paid for a study that came out as a book that was analyzing humans and chimpanzees in Sierra Leone and the effects of climate change on them. Again, I'm sure there's nice folks in Sierra Leone that are very interested in that. Why are my folks in Oklahoma? Why are they being forced to pay for that? I could go one after another on things that we have studied over the years, but let me tell you what happens. When we highlight these things and a little sunshine hits them, suddenly people start backing up and agencies stop funding some of these things that everyone nods their head and said, where did that crazy thing come from? So because of the reports that we put out, we're not paying anymore for helmet studies in Ghana anymore. We're not paying for drag shows in Ecuador anymore. We're no longer paying for the study on the Russian wine industry that Americans used to pay for. We're no longer funding the 3D puppets that we once paid for. We've been able to put sunshine on those things, and those things have stopped. The challenge is, how do we actually set this into a process so that we're not having to play whack-a-mole all the time to be able to take down one after another? The people of my state, they don't want to pay for those things. They want to pay for border security, and they want to pay for good schools, and they want to have good roads. They want to have lower gas prices. Those are the things that they want. So how do we actually get to that? Well, I could outline right now $170 billion in wasteful spending in the federal government just today. Simple things that most Americans would agree on. We spend $8 billion a year just for federal buildings to lease them or to do maintenance for them. $8 billion a year. Currently, most of those buildings, because we have so many federal employees that are teleworking, most of those buildings are 25% full. We're spending $8 billion a year on buildings that are mostly empty. Most businesses in America would say, that's a waste of money. I'm going to find a way to do that less. Except the federal government doesn't do that. We just continue to be able to lease empty office space and maintain empty office space. That should not be a partisan issue. That should be an issue everybody in this body looks at and says, there's something that we can do to be able to make this better. Let's be more efficient. Starting with the new Trump administration. They have launched a new initiative that folks have made fun of, DOES, the Department of Government Efficiency. And I'm fascinated by the number of people that step out and they make fun of this initiative to say this Department of Government Efficiency. And then I ask them the simple question, do you know a way the government could be more efficient? And people will say, well, yeah. Should we do that? Yes, is the answer. So the very simple statement is, if we find duplication in government, why don't we highlight it and then eliminate it? If we find areas where there's tax regulations that actually don't make sense, that actually slow the economy down rather than actually encourage economic development in the country, why don't we fix that? If we find areas of permitting where permitting actually prevents government growth rather than accelerates the growth of our economy, why don't we go after that? Where there's waste in agencies, where there's empty federal buildings, where there's federal projects that really should be done by the state or local government, why don't we make those changes? That's what this whole concept is about the Department of Government Efficiency, is to actually create a mechanism to say, let's stop talking about it and highlighting it a little bit at a time. Let's actually work to be able to make this better in the days ahead. I'm very pleased that a whole group of colleagues are passionate about this as well. They're coming to the floor today to be able to highlight some of these areas of inefficiency and to say, yes, absolutely, I see it as well. Because while I do federal fumbles every single year, I continue to also say to all of my colleagues, we should not be the only office doing this, and thankfully we are not. There are multiple offices that their staff are also looking for areas of government efficiency, and for the first time in a long time, we've built enough momentum to say, let's get these done. Let's not just show them, and so we embarrass agencies not to do it next year. Let's actually set a process in place. So, Mr. President, today I've invited multiple colleagues, including my colleague sitting at the dais today, to be able to find a moment in their very busy schedules to be able to come and highlight areas where the government can be more efficient, where we can be more effective at protecting taxpayer dollars, and where we can stop throwing Americans' dollars out the door for things that everyone would recognize as wasteful. When we have almost $2 trillion in debt, it is definitely the moment for us to say, let's work on being even more efficient in the days ahead, because we desperately need that. So, Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor to my colleague from West Virginia, who has been very outspoken in trying to be able to protect taxpayer dollars in West Virginia and for the nation, and to try to make ways to make this more effective in the days ahead.
Different brand. So thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lankford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all of you for the work that you do on this. To go back to the dollars and cents of what Senator Blumenthal was talking about, in 2022, I was at the Rio Grande Valley and asked some of the Border Patrol folks there, how much do the cartels make just trafficking people in this region? Just this region, which is that section of the border, how much they make just trafficking people? And the response was, we estimate $153 million a week that they make trafficking people. The open border policy that happened in the last 4 years has facilitated incredible financial gain for the cartels. When they were making $153 million a week, moving people through at the highest numbers they possibly could, that facilitated this. In addition to that, other criminal organizations around the world saw how much money the cartels were making, and they wanted a piece of the travel agent money. And we started getting ISIS individuals coming in from Tajikistan because they were being facilitated in by criminal organizations coming in because it was easy to move. So this is incredibly important to be able to shut the money down. I do agree with Senator Blumenthal on that, and it's incredibly important that we actually use the authority that's already there to be able to get this done. Mr. Cuccinelli, thanks again for all the work that you've done on this for so long on this. You were very outspoken on H.R. 2, which is a great bill, very thorough on that, and you were very forward to say Congress needs to pass this bill. What are the aspects of that that you would say that still need to be done?
Well, you know, the chairman started with the president's authority to close the border, which I agree he has now. But H.R. 2 really starts to get at the longer-term enforcement arc, processing of folks and keeping them out, closing loopholes that even if you close the border between the legal ports of entry, people will still come to the ports of entry, and there'll be I'll call it a bit of a negotiation, a bit of a game there about who can get in and who cannot. In the last 4 years, everybody's gotten in. And you really need to give your OFO officers in those ports of entry the legal tools to turn people away, anyone away who cannot demonstrate a then current basis to be in the country. Right. And H.R. 2 really advanced that. As you know, Senator, This whole area of law has been tangled up in knots with court rulings. We've heard
It's a mess, yeah. We were talking before, Mr. Arthur, about the Flores
Right,
settlement.
Flores is a major one.
That's an issue that has to be settled in law.
Yes.
We have to be able to go engage in Congress to say, what's this going to be? Because the court just literally created the 20-day time period. And now we're stuck with it because Congress has not been able to respond. Mr. Arthur?
Senator, if I could add to that, there was a truly bipartisan report that was issued in April of 2019 by the CBP Families and Children Care Panel. Leon Fresco, who was Barack Obama's guy at DOJ, was on that panel. And they talked about all of these issues. And they they suggested solutions, including processing and detention centers down at the border. But they also called on Congress to fix Flores. Congress has the ability to fix it. And again, when there's a bipartisan recommendation like that, it's almost incumbent on Congress to at least give it a look, because this is a huge problem. The kids are suffering. I mean, everything that you've heard today is caused by that.
Yeah, it is. So I look at things like Safe Third Country as an area, trying to be able to get clarity there, ending the parole abuse, which we don't have a clear definition of humanitarian parole. We've got to be able to make that very, very clear. Dealing with the Title 42-like authority for emergency moments to say when the cartels hold a bunch of folks and they rush a border patrol station or an area at that point, what to be able to do on that. TVPRA, Flores, all these different areas. These are areas that Congress has got to be able to act on and provide clarity, because courts are going to define it in different ways, and the rules are even different in Texas than what they are in California or in Arizona based on different court actions. And so we've got to be able to have some clarity on this, and that's an area where Congress has got to be able to act. So saying all that, the other issue that was brought up before was about what are called special interest aliens. These are folks that are coming in from Tajikistan and other areas that the Mexicans are not going to take back. These are recalcitrant countries that are not accepting folks back. We've got to have some sort of legal response, but we also have the authority of the administration to be able to put State Department pressure on some of these countries as well. But this is an area that we've got to be able to clarify in law on the recalcitrant country. Any comments from any of you specifically about those individuals? Mr. Arthur.
Senator Lankford, when I was the chief of the National Security Law Division at INS, I worked for Janet Reno. Whenever we picked up a special interest alien at the border, Ms. Reno would call me day and night. I got a lot of calls from the command center in the middle of the night. Today, those individuals are being released into the United States, are being processed by line border patrol agents. This is a completely ridiculous situation. We've heard FBI Director Chris Wray talk about every light is blinking. We are in a situation, I served at the INS before September 11th. We are in a situation right now that is so much worse than what we were looking at.
We had 70,000 people that were special interest aliens that came in last year that we know of at this point from DHS records. And FBI told me point blank, because Chris Wray sat right there and I asked him, he told us point blank that he is not aware of all the SIAs that are coming in. The DHS was not informing him of those individuals. So we are not tracking those once they're in the country. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Senator Kim.
Thank you.
Governor Noem, great to see you.
Great to see you, too.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for accepting this nod that the president has given you. For Brian, thanks. Both of you, you've walked through a lot. I have had the privilege of knowing you for a very long time since we served together in the House of Representatives. So I have the benefit of knowing your qualifications and how strong you are in all these background issues and how hard you work on these things, because I've seen it firsthand. So I appreciate you stepping into this, because a lot of attention across the country will be focused on this. You know that full well, and you've stepped into it. For Governor Landry, my state and many folks in my state are praying for you and for your state. You've done a great job in leadership at this moment in a very, very tough time for Louisiana. And we don't want to see acts of terrorism anywhere in our country. It's incredibly difficult days for a governor. So thanks for your leadership on that as well. I also have to tell you, Christy, I've whined to my wife occasionally about the temperature that's coming on Monday. I'm very excited about Trump's inaugural, but we're all going to be sitting outside in about 12 degrees. And I thought just for fun, I would check South Dakota on Monday. It's 1 for a high. For a high.
Yeah, for a high.
And so I'm going to stop whining about the temperature Monday here in Washington, D.C. on it. I'm going to run through a couple of things here because I know you. Not everybody in Oklahoma knows you. The questions that I get from people, though, in Oklahoma
I want to be able to run past you because they want to be able to know the answer to these things. So I'm just going to blitz through a whole bunch of them. Will you use the legal authority that DHS already has to be able to close our border?
Yes, Senator. I will work with President Trump to ensure that we're securing our border.
Thank you. There's a lot of things that this Congress needs to do, has already been mentioned by Senator Slotkin as well, that we need to do to be able to close loopholes, to be able to give you additional authority. But there's a tremendous amount of authority currently not being used. And Oklahomans are saying, is that about to be used? And they'll be grateful to be able to hear that. No other president has ever created a phone app to be able to facilitate a faster processing of aliens in, called the CBP-1 app. It's been mentioned several times here. Will you use your authority to stop facilitating faster processing of illegal aliens into our country with the CBP-1 app?
Yes, Senator. We will eliminate the CBP-1 app, maintain some of the data that's in it that's critical to knowing who's in our country, but that app will no longer be in use.
Thank you. No other president has ever used the parole authority just in general, humanitarian parole, to facilitate faster processing of aliens into our country, which leads to the catch and release we've all heard about. So the Oklahomans that I talk to say, are we about to end the abuse of parole and end catch and release? Is that about to stop?
Senator, President Trump's been very clear that he will end catch and release.
Terrific. Folks want to know, will you use your authority with the funds that are given to you by Congress to actually build more wall rather than use the funding that's given to you, as the Biden administration did, to do environmental remediation around the border rather than actual border wall and border structure?
Yeah. Senator, President Trump has been clear that he wants to build the wall.
So do we. So will you use your authority to be able to scan more vehicles? And obviously, we've got to get you the funding to be able to do this, to be able to scan more vehicles and individuals that are carrying fentanyl into our country through our ports of entry.
Yes, Senator. We will continue to use technologies, but hopefully be able to use more with the resources that we're granted to scan those vehicles and know what's coming in and out of this country.
Last year, FEMA employees during disaster relief were instructed by one of their supervisors that if they see a Trump sign or a Trump flag flying, to skip that house, to not stop by there and tell them what their federal government can do for them. Will you allow FEMA employees or any within DHS to politicize their role and to pick and choose who gets help and who doesn't as an American?
Senator, under President Trump's administration, disaster and emergency relief will not be handed out with political bias. Every American will be responded to and treated equally.
That's what folks want to know. Will you review the Secret Service responsibilities to be able to go back through it and to say, are they focused on their primary mission, or is there something that could distract? Secret Service still chases down financial crimes. They're still chasing down child exploitation. Those are serious things for Treasury or for FBI to do. But there's a question is if that's the first priority for Secret Service.
Senator, the Secret Service is in need of dramatic reforms. They do have a protective detail element that is their priority, and also an investigation side. My understanding is that that investigation side is often used to train the protective detail officers, but clearly they are not focusing on what their true duty is, and it needs to get back onto what they were created for, and that was the protective detail mission and emergency situations that they need to help plan and prepare for and defend.
Thank you. This committee made a request to the Secretary of Homeland Security last year, and by the way, also the head of the FBI, to be able to come before this committee and to do what every Secretary of Homeland Security has done for the last 20 years, every single year, unbroken, until last year. And then the Secretary refused to come before this committee in an open session and talk about national threats. Now, the former chairman protested strongly to the Biden administration and DHS. They weren't coming, but they still refused to be able to come. Will you come before this committee and talk about the threats openly so the American people can hear them in a public forum?
Yes, Senator. Senator Peters and I discussed this quite a bit in our meeting as well, and I have committed to come and give that briefing to this committee and to the American people.
Thank you. We need that. Let me tell you another challenge we've had with Homeland Security in the past 4 years. When we ask for data and for information, we get, I'll get back to you on that. When we ask again and again and again and again, we get the same statement, I'll get back to you on that. Now, I can go down the street to the command center where they actually get the data in live and they have it up on big screens and they're tracking exactly what's happening on the southern border to the minute. But if I ask for what happened last month, they'll say, we're still gathering that data. We're not asking for anything other than what Congress is supposed to get. That's the ability to be able to see data and to have real oversight over DHS. And that has been a failure of this DHS, along with multiple other issues on that. When we request the data for basic things like how many special interest aliens were allowed across the border, if it was last year, we had to find out on our own, it was 70,000 people that were targeted by this administration as a potential national security risk, that were not just found at the border, that were released when they were found at the border. 70,000 people just from last year in the country right now that this administration declared at the border they're a potential national security risk. Now, I know you're not going to do that, but when we ask for the data and for the information, when we say, how's the National Vetting Center working? Do you have the connection between it to be able to screen individuals there? We're just doing our oversight responsibility. You've served in Congress before and did a great job on that and did oversight. We want to still be able to do the same thing. Will you provide data to this committee so that we can cooperate with you to help?
Senator, I will follow the law and be transparent with you and allow you to do the due diligence towards oversight that you are tasked with.
I have absolutely no doubt about that, Governor. I have absolutely no doubt. Looking forward to you serving in that role. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, this week we observe International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We honor the 6 million Jews whose lives were lost during the Holocaust, their families, and the scar that that has left on the world. The term "we will never forget" still rings 8 decades later. The end of that atrocity did not bring the end of anti-Semitism, unfortunately. On October the 7th of 2023, Hamas terrorists brutally attacked Israel with the intent to wipe Israel off the map. They killed 1,200 people simply because they're Jewish. People marched through the streets, even in sections of America and on university campuses, screaming "from the river to the sea," meaning the obliteration of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation. A few months ago, I stood at the Nova Music Festival site, literally within sight of Gaza. I walked through that area with a family. I talked to one of the survivors that was there that day. She is still reliving the emotion of being there, just doing an all-night music festival. And as the sun came up, terrorists came in to kill as many people as possible at that music festival. In the immediate aftermath of that attack, it was clarifying for the United States we need to continue to stand with Israel. Terrorism is not done. Anti-Semitism has not ended in the world. We should continue to be able to speak out. In my state of Oklahoma, it's extremely personal. We have a lot of Oklahomans that are very pro-Israel because they love freedom. They love a functioning democracy. And as Israel being the only democracy in all the Middle East and a thriving economy, we have a lot of economic connections to Israel. We have a lot of family connections. We have a lot of individuals that travel to Israel for both vacation and for moments to be able to reflect on their own faith. It's a common connection. In fact, after October the 7th, my office and I were personally connected with trying to be able to help some families and individuals who were touring in Israel at that time find a way to be able to escape from the fighting and to be able to get out. It was a very, very difficult moment. And it continues to be a very difficult moment for the people of Israel. It's all they want to do is to be able to live at peace with the people around them. Within days, Israel was not just facing a war with Gaza. Hezbollah began to attack them from the north, from Lebanon. The Houthis began to fire missiles at them from the south. And then within a few months, Iran itself began to fire missiles and rockets and one-way attack drones towards Israel, literally facing a war with individuals attacking them from the north, south, east, and west. Israel just wants to live in peace. In the middle of a war, when a group of terrorists crossed the border and began to slaughter Israelis, the International Criminal Court determined it was going to jump in and make a clear statement. Great. Make a clear statement about terrorism. Call out those that are attacking civilians and slaughtering people as they sleep on that morning. But instead, the International Criminal Court released arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and for Yoav Gallant, the now former defense minister, for trying to defend their country from terrorism. Myself, my other colleagues remembered immediately that during the war in Afghanistan, this same International Criminal Court was filing charges against American soldiers trying to defend the United States while they were fighting in Afghanistan. This is the very definition of a rogue court. By the way, they're in the process of trying to be able to figure out how to be able to fix their image. And so just within the past few days, the International Criminal Court has filed an arrest warrant for some of the Taliban leaders. Well, welcome to the 2000s. The International Criminal Court has now figured out that the Taliban are bad, something the rest of the world has known and recognized for more than 2 decades. This body had the opportunity to do something pretty common sense. Speak out and say, we're not a party to the International Criminal Court. The United States has never participated in that. In fact, no president has ever even requested, Republican or Democrat, to join that agreement for the International Criminal Court. No one wants to be a part of that in the United States. I know of no Oklahoman that would say, we want our troops to be under the authority of an international court. We're not going to do that. Israel, by the way, has also not joined the International Criminal Court. They have no desire to also be under the authority of a foreign court. They've seen full well the UN anti-Semitism, and they have no interest in international bodies trying to be able to tell them right from wrong. So they're not a party to it either. But the International Criminal Court has seen fit to be able to challenge and try to call out American soldiers and to be able to call out the leaders of Israel even after they've been attacked. So this body in the United States Senate had an opportunity yesterday to be able to speak out on that and to actually sanction and to allow further sanctions for individuals from the International Criminal Court and entities that cooperate with them to say you cannot come after the United States or after our allies. It was a very simple, straightforward bill. It was a bill that passed with a very large bipartisan majority through the House of Representatives. In fact, it's passed twice now with a large bipartisan majority in the House of Representatives. But when it came here to the United States Senate, my Democratic colleagues shrugged and said no. The Trump administration, I'm confident, will speak out with sanctions against the International Criminal Court. They did during the first Trump presidency. I'm confident they will again. What I'm not confident of is every future president after President Trump, if they will hold the same high standard to be able to protect American citizens, our soldiers, and to be able to stand alongside with Israel. Now, I've come to this body over and over and over again, and I've said we should speak out in these areas. We should speak out against anti-Semitism. For instance, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, that definition of what anti-Semitism is, that's a definition that the United States was a party to more than 3 decades ago. Our State Department still recognizes what it means to be anti-Semitic and makes it very clear on that. But this body has failed to actually impose that same definition of anti-Semitism in our Department of Justice, for instance, with the FBI, or with our Department of Education. And some may say, well, why is that even an issue? Well, ask the Jewish students at Columbia University, and they'll tell you why that's important. This week at Columbia University, masked students burst into a modern history of Israel class, chanting anti-Semitic tropes and calling out to crush Zionism in their class at Columbia University this week during Holocaust Remembrance Week. I think having a clear definition of what anti-Semitism is and calling out universities that would allow that kind of oppression on their own students, I think is important. I think for this body to be able to speak out with one voice to say, we're not going to allow American soldiers nor our allies to be called in by a kangaroo international court, I think is important to us. And of this week, of all weeks, on Holocaust Remembrance Week, we should speak with one voice. To say never again means never again. And we will continue to stand with our friends and allies in Israel, and we'll continue to stand against anti-Semitism here, there, anywhere. With that, I yield the floor.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Kennedy, it's good to see you again. We had some great visits in my office. We've done some follow-up calls to be able to go through. You and I have talked about 100 different issues and backgrounds and things. You've been able to address a lot of them today and just different questions to be able to clear up social media rumors and the things that are out there on it. So I do appreciate that. We've talked about pharmacy benefit managers. We've talked about the nursing home rule the Biden administration put down. We talked about your views on agriculture and commercial and row crop agriculture. We've talked about food issues, and you made it very, very clear. You're not going to tell Americans what to eat, but you do want Americans to know what they're eating. And I think that's a pretty fair perspective on that. I do want to talk to you about some areas that you and I have talked about as well. We have some disagreements, you and I, on the issue of life and when life begins on that. You've been very outspoken on that, and we've had some good opportunities to be able to talk about that. Title 10 is specifically in the HHS area. This has been an area that has been interpreted for a long time, and President Trump in the first administration interpreted that rule to say that his administration will prohibit the performance, referral for, or promotion of abortion as a part of the Title 10 program. That he made that very clear in the first administration. Obviously, that's his decision to make again on that, on how he wants to handle that, and he's made a lot of public statements on that. The Biden administration not only reversed that, not only rescinded that rule, but they went one step the other direction. In my state in Oklahoma, as you and I have talked about, the Biden administration cut off funding to the state of Oklahoma for AIDS testing, for breast cancer screening, and for other areas of poverty health care because my state didn't promote abortion. It wouldn't provide. If my state wouldn't promote abortion in the state, we got cut off for federal funds for AIDS testing and for other things. My simple question to you is, how are you going to handle Title 10 on that? I saw how President Biden handled that in the punitive measures that came on my state for those that are in rural health care. How are you going to handle Title 10?
I'm going to support President Trump's policies on Title 10. I agree with President Trump that every abortion is a tragedy. I agree with him that we cannot be a moral nation if we have 1.2 million abortions a year. I agree with him that the states should control abortion. President Trump has told me that he wants to end late-term abortions, and he wants to protect conscience exemptions, and that he wants to end federal funding for abortions here or abroad. That's Title 10. I serve at the pleasure of the president. I'm going to implement his policies.
Thank you for that. President Biden, when he came in, immediately closed down the Office of Civil Rights and Conscience Protections within HHS. There's a statement that's come out recently that he's going to reopen that office again to be able to protect the civil rights of Americans. One of the things that Javier Becerra did immediately when he came into HHS was conscience protections for medical professionals that were being compelled against their conscience to perform medical procedures that violated their conscience. Javier Becerra stepped in immediately into HHS and withdrew that and said, no, the federal government will tell you what you believe about these issues. You don't have conscience protections anymore, and refuse to protect those folks. Will you step in and say that healthcare individuals have the right of conscience again, as the federal law allows?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that occurs to me when you ask that question is, what patient would want somebody doing a surgery on them that, believes that the surgery is against their conscience being forced to perform that? I don't know anybody who would want to have a doctor performing a surgery that the doctor is morally opposed to. Listen, I came from a family that was split on life and choice. I have cousins today who believe that abortion at any stage is equivalent to homicide. Now, there are other people who believe the opposite. But the good thing in my family that I really loved is that we were able to have those conversations and respect each other. And I wish that we could do that nationally. And if forcing somebody to participate in a medical procedure as a provider that they believe is murder does not make any sense to me. We need to welcome diversity in this country. We need to respect diversity. And we need to respect each other when we have different opinions and not force our opinions on other people.
Yeah, thank you for that. The FDA, under the Biden administration, changed the rules for the chemical abortion drug and said you no longer need to see a physician. So if you have an ectopic pregnancy or all kinds of, don't even go anymore to see a physician. But they also changed an area that has been something that's been very particular. You've talked about a lot, and that's transparency. They changed the position and said, don't tell us if there's a side effect on this drug unless she dies. But other than that, don't tell us anymore. Literally, don't give transparent information to the American people or to the women who take this drug anymore. We don't want that reported. My question to you is, will FDA move to be able to actually give transparency to the American people and to say this drug is no different than any other drug? We don't going to protect it just because it's political for some folks. People should know side effects on this drug, and there should be reporting.
Yeah, I mean, it's against everything we believe in this country that patients or doctors should not be reporting adverse events. We need to know what adverse events are. We need to understand the safety of every drug, mifepristone and every other drug. And President Trump has made it clear to me that one of the things, he is not taking a position yet on mifepristone, a detailed position, but he's made it clear to me that he wants me to look at safety issues. And I'll ask NIH and FDA to do that.
Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, I only have 5 minutes with you, and I've got a lot of experience with CMS, so you're just going to have to listen. 2 things. One, if you want to move from advocacy
Thank you.
That we got a chance to be able to spend together to be able to talk through a lot of these issues. Thanks for your service to the country, both in Congress, though you were in the wrong party at the time, and your service to the country through your service there, including in my great state in Oklahoma, that you had the opportunity to be able to serve there. I want to give an opportunity for you to be able to answer a few things on it, and I want to set some context. There's been a lot of questions about 702 and about Edward Snowden, and it may seem like this is repetitive to be able to come through it, but there are thousands of intelligence employees and folks that they have also taken an oath to the country and to the Constitution. They serve our country every day. They're the folks that don't have a uniform on, that no one ever says thank you to them, and no one ever buys them lunch because people don't know who they are. But they every day put their lives on the line, and they work very hard to be able to protect Americans. And when Edward Snowden got mad at his employer that he didn't get the promotion that he wanted, and started harvesting information, and then found some things that he didn't like on it, and then kept going, and then released them to media and went to China, and then went from China to Russia and became a Russian citizen and continued to be able to layer out intelligence unrelated to the civil liberties of any American, and then said, I have more and I can release them at any time I want. They don't see him as brave. They see him as a traitor. And the concern among so many here, and I think what a lot of the folks in the intelligence community that you'd have the responsibility to oversight is, they want to hear that you also believe the same thing, that not just he broke the law, but that he's a traitor, because they don't want that to ever happen again. And all the sources that they had, that they trusted and that trusted them, now their lives were at risk. And all the programs that they had that were determined lawful all collapsed, and that intelligence then was gone, and the president didn't have access to a lot of information for decision making. So this is a big deal to everybody here because it's a big deal to everybody that you'll also oversee in that role as well. And so it's helpful for them to be able to hear your heart on this. So was Edward Snowden a traitor?
Senator, my heart is with my commitment to our Constitution and our nation's security.
Ours too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have shown throughout my almost 22 years of service in the military, as well as my time in Congress, how seriously I take the privilege of having access to classified information and our nation's secrets. And that's why I'm committed, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, to join you in making sure that there is no future Snowden-type leak. And I would do so by taking 4 specific actions. Number one, again, to make sure that there are no illegal and unconstitutional programs, limiting in a big way those who have access to our nation's top secrets through security clearance reform, making sure that every single person in the workforce knows about the legal whistleblower channels available to them, and making sure that there's a direct line available to me should anyone have concerns. If people choose to step outside of those legal channels to raise any concerns about programs or actions that exist within the intelligence community that are classified, there will be no excuse to do so, and they should be charged and prosecuted under the law.
Was he a traitor at the time when he took America's secrets, released them in public, and then ran to China and became a Russian citizen?
Senator, I'm focused on the future and how we can prevent something like this from happening again.
So,
Lankford.
Thank you, Chairman Paul. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Actually, yesterday I released my 8th report, what we call federal fumbles, where we regularly put out in front of the American people areas of waste and abuse and fraud or improper payments, and try to be able to highlight those and shine some sunshine on them to hopefully get rid of them and to be able to make tax dollars more efficient in the way we're spending on this. Many of those things, as you can imagine full well, were foreign aid related. That we've talked about over the last several years, including this year as well. We highlighted that the federal government and the American taxpayer paid for 12 drag shows in Ecuador. I'm not sure why the people of Ecuador couldn't pay for their own drag shows, but apparently Oklahoma taxpayers had to pay for that. The USAID funded fisheries in Algeria, where they literally built a fish farm in the middle of the desert among a people that don't eat fish, actually, in their normal diet because they live in the desert. They don't normally eat fish, and we're not interested in eating the fish. But American taxpayers and my Oklahoma taxpayers paid for those, and that has become an issue for me. There was a study that was done by the NEH on humans, chimpanzees, and climate change in Sierra Leone. We highlighted how we did a study with Oklahoma tax dollars to study the effect of climate change on European butterflies. Again, I don't know why the Europeans couldn't pay for that. We did a study on the effects of COVID-19 on the Russians. Again, not sure why the Russians couldn't have paid for that. And one of my favorites of the long list of least favorites here, we did a study on the benefit of seatbelts and helmets on individuals driving in Ghana. I could go ahead and tell you right now, seatbelts and helmets will help you and don't have to pay a dime to be able to do that study. So over and over and over again, we've highlighted this. The difference now and then is there's a bigger megaphone, and part of the frustration from my friends on the left is Elon Musk is daring to tell 1 billion people on X that this is happening. But when it was only a few people that knew, or my limited following on X, it was okay. But if the megaphone gets louder and it gets pointed out more, it becomes more offensive because then it becomes a risk. So I have several things that I want to be able to drill down on. I've talked for years about Voice of America and the messaging they put out. It is literally government-paid journalists that are supposed to tell the government story of America internationally. What they're actually doing often is talking about murders in America and riots in America and how Trump is ruining Christianity in America, and on and on and on have been the negative stories about America that they're telling to the world on it. So one of my first questions to either of you is about the messaging that we put out globally, that we put out with Oklahoma tax dollars and American tax dollars to tell the American story and how the American story is being told internationally.
Thank you, Senator. I could actually speak a little bit from my experience with the Fulbright Scholarship Board, where I was also chagrined to see some of the people that we were thinking about sending abroad clearly didn't love this country and clearly had a kind of criticism that I think wasn't the best message that you would not necessarily want to see out there in the world. I also worry about the boomerang effect. So not just the message that we're sending abroad, but because of the nature of technology today, these voices that are meant to help create narratives abroad actually coming back and being a form of government propaganda here at home. Because that message, unlike maybe in the 1950s when we were trying to subvert communism in Greece, that message then comes back here. And so the content of that message, like you're talking about, is so critical that it is, in fact, something that is supportive of our interests and accurate, and something that is not going to undermine support for the United States here at home even.
Right. Schellenberger, you want to add anything to that?
Well, only that, I mean, of course, everybody should be free to speak their mind, but I think if we're going to have taxpayers, funding this activity, they should be talking about how special this country is. I mean, that's why so many people have been trying to come here. So the level of anti-Americanism and globalism that we've seen promoted by these organizations, I think it's horrendous. So I share your views.
When the global media outlet for the United States sounds a lot like Russia Today's messaging globally, we have a problem on it, and that's our problem. They spend a lot of time saying we're going to prove that we have a free press by having government-paid reporters tell a story. If they want to prove we have a free press, we can point to CBS, ABC, and NBC and say, look, we have a free press on it, but we should be getting our messaging out on this. One other quick question on this. The Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction noted at least $11 million has gone directly to the Taliban from our foreign aid of the $2 billion, and they couldn't identify the rest, exactly who were the recipients of that aid. Have you been able to track at all aid that's gone directly to the Taliban since we have left Afghanistan?
I have not, sir, but what I will point out, there's been a lot of complaints about the Inspector General at USAID being let go. What was the Inspector General doing exactly? I mean, we've seen all the waste, fraud, and abuse that you've documented, so what's the point of having an Inspector General if they're not going to inspect?
Right. I do hope that the president actually nominates a new inspector general quickly. That is an important role for Congress to be able to have some insight into different agencies, and it's important to have that role, but I would agree. Your job is to inspect and to be able to report back, and if you're not identifying this waste, why are you there? I yield back.
President, we are in the 10th week of the first 10 weeks, obviously, of the Senate's session. It's been exceptionally productive during this time period. We've not only moved more nominees into confirmation for President Trump than any Senate has done in more than 2 decades. We passed bills like the Laken Riley Act, which will absolutely help us in trying to be able to remove criminal aliens out of the country. We've rolled back a lot of Biden's last-minute regulations that he literally threw in the final hours that did not have the oversight, did not have the appearance, and they obviously didn't do it in the first 3.5 years of their term. They stalled it to the very end on that for a reason, because it was unpopular with the American people. Those have been rolled back, many of them, and we still have several to go. Today, we're finishing out a bill called Halt Fentanyl. The fentanyl epidemic is raging in our country. If you go back to just 2019 and compare that to 2023, in that short period of time, in my state of Oklahoma, in 2019, we had 50 people that died of fentanyl. Fast forward 4 years to 2023, the last year we still have that we have complete records on, that is actually 730 people died. In 2023, across the country, we had 74,000 Americans that died from fentanyl overdose. Again, go back to 2019, only about 10% of the opioid deaths in my state had fentanyl connected to it. Fast forward to 2023, 90% of the fentanyl deaths are related to fentanyl. What the Mexican cartels are doing and what Chinese precursor chemicals coming into our country are causing is the death of our fellow citizens. As they slip it into different fake pills, as they slip it into methamphetamine, as they slip fentanyl into cocaine, as they slip it into different places, to have someone who is using a drug or someone who never intended to use that drug to take their life. It has to stop. Even worse, The cartels not only know what they're doing, but they're trying to find specific ways to be able to avoid our laws. Fentanyl has a very specific definition in science of exactly what makes up fentanyl. And so what the cartels are doing is they're changing that chemical makeup ever so slightly in what they call an analog, and so it's really not fentanyl as a definition. Meaning law enforcement, when they see it on the street, it has the same effect. It still kills you, but it's actually technically not fentanyl, so you can't be prosecuted for it. This bill that we're bringing to the floor today opens up the fentanyl definition to deal with fentanyl and the analogs of fentanyl, so that the cartels can't continue to be able to bring in these deadly drugs into our country to take the lives and increase addiction in America and get away with it. This puts in the hands of law enforcement, where they've been disarmed in that area, enforcement priorities so they can actually enforce the law on these cartels and on the drug dealers. And so we can identify it for what it really is. It's a killer drug. The whole Fentanyl Act is incredibly important. And I'm fully aware, in a week where our country is talking about, are we going to have another government shutdown? It's going to slip through and people aren't even going to notice it. But law enforcement will notice it, and families in the future will notice it. When folks aren't dealing with this same addiction, as we're putting one more piece out there to be able to take this on. Now, Mr. President, as we talk about the government shutdown looming tonight at midnight, I want to remind you and this body again, this is something I've spoken out on for years. Years ago, I sat down with my Democratic colleagues and said, how do we take government shutdowns off the table? How do we end this? There's been proposals for literally decades to be able to end government shutdowns. Republicans have had a proposal for decades that said, well, if we get to the end of the fiscal year and we haven't passed all the bills, we'll just cut spending 1% every month, and that'll force us to come to the table. And my Democratic colleagues have said to me over and over again, you guys are so crazy about reducing federal spending, you'll never reopen the government, it'll just cut funding every single month and it's easy. I'm never gonna vote for that. My Democratic colleagues literally have a bill to say we'll end government shutdowns by every single month that we don't have a bill passed on it. We'll increase funding by 1% every single month. And Republicans have looked at our Democrat colleagues and said, you've lost your mind. You want to increase spending every single month anyway. You'll never pass another bill. We're never going to do that. There's a bill that sat out there for a while that sounds great called No Budget, No Pay, that says if we don't pass our budget, we don't get our appropriations work done, then members of Congress won't be paid. And a lot of people say, that's a great idea. I smile at folks back home and I say, I hate to be blunt, but do you know how much most members of the Senate are worth? Their congressional salary for many of my colleagues is a rounding error to their investment portfolio. They're really not worried about their congressional pay to be able to make ends meet at the end of that month. In addition to that, constitutionally, you actually can't change a member's pay during the time that they're actually set. So all it would mean is they wouldn't get their paycheck for however long it took to negotiate it, then they'd still get their money. That's really not going to make a difference. When I sat down with my Democratic colleagues several years ago and said, what's the one pressure point that we all feel that we can hold the American people harmless but actually get our work done, it's the same thing. Rich or poor, live far away, live close, all of us have the same precious possession that we're all attentive to, and it's time. We all have the same amount of time in a day, and we all fight our calendars because they're full. So our simple solution to end government shutdowns is, if we get to the end of a fiscal year, like we are at tonight, and we haven't got our work done, like it's happening so far, government stays open, same year's level as last year, nothing changes on it. The American people are held harmless, all the agencies are held harmless, but members of Congress, both House and Senate, we stay in session 7 days a week. We have a quorum call at noon every single day, and we can't move to any bill other than appropriations. In other words, if you don't have your work done, you've got to stay until your work's actually done. And we can't go do something else. We have to stay here to be able to get it done. I guarantee you, if this body was in session 7 days a week for 2 weeks, by the end of the second week, we would all be staring at each other saying, I want to go see my family. I want to be able to do the other things that are responsibilities that a senator has. I need to be able to do those things. Let's get this resolved. If you remove all of our time, it puts the pressure on us to be able to actually get our work done. If I can say it just as simple as this, my mom, when my brother and I know it may be shocking to some people that my brother and I didn't always get along every day growing up, but when my brother and I would get into a fight, my mom would send both of us into one of our rooms and say, you guys stay in that room, fight it out. When you're done, then you can come out to the rest of the house. But go settle it in there, but make sure it's settled before you come out here. As silly as it sounds, this government shutdown prevention bill that I've brought year after year is just as simple as my mom's advice. Don't make everybody else have to listen to the fight. Members of Congress should get in the room, fight it out, settle it, and when we're done, we come out and actually vote for it. But in the meantime, the rest of the country shouldn't have to suffer because we didn't get our work done on time. That seems pretty straightforward to me. It's had wide bipartisan support. And there have been lots of moments we've been very close to passing it. There's no trick in it. There's no anything else. It's just, why do we have these crazy government shutdown fight moments that the rest of the world looks at us as Americans and says, why can't the Americans get their act together? And the rest of the country looks at us and says, we have to work out all the details. Why don't you guys have to work out all your details? Those folks are not wrong. We will one day solve this. Apparently, it's not today. Today, there's still a fight over whether we're going to keep the government open for tomorrow. Federal workers that are already dealing with a lot of tension in their life, quite frankly, they've gotten emails and messages. They're hearing about downsizing in federal agencies. They're anxious right now. And there are a lot of folks in my state and quite frankly around the country that say we need to reduce the size of the bureaucracy, which we do. The last time we had a major reduction in the size of the bureaucracy was under Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was president, he declared we're going to reinvent government. And under Bill Clinton's presidency, they reduced the federal workforce by 400,000 people. It was a big reduction in federal workforce. That's the last time that's occurred, decades ago. We've grown now to a massive size that we've got to reduce again. Everybody knows it, but if you're a federal worker or a family member or a next-door neighbor, you go to church together, you know how agonizing this really is. The last thing those federal workers need is one more thing hanging over their head of a government shutdown at the same time. But it's being debated right now. And my Democratic colleagues are trying to determine if we're going to go into shutdown tonight still. I would simply say, let's get our work done. We disagree on many issues, okay? That's what grown-ups have. We have disagreements. Let's settle our disagreements. Let's keep us operating. Let's take this off the table for good at some point so we don't have this threat hanging over us and some countdown clock on 24-hour news. Here's how many minutes it is until we have a government shutdown. Let's take that off the table and let's get our work done. We have a giant deficit, giant, $2 trillion in overspending this year. We should have budget fights. We should be more efficient. We should allow DOGE and some of those folks to be able to go after some of the wasteful spending. I don't have a lot of people back in my state that are contacting me and saying, I really want to make sure that we're still spending all that money for the grants to go to the transgender opera in Colombia that USAID is funding, or the DEI initiatives in Serbia that USAID is funding. No one's calling me and saying, we need to make sure we keep doing those things. Everyone looks at it and shakes their head and says, what in the world? I want my tax money to go to education, and I want it to go to roads, and I want it to go to national defense. Don't do that. So let's find ways to be more efficient. Let's find ways to be able to reduce waste and fraud. But let's also have the fight during office hours so the American people don't have to feel the effect of a government shutdown. clock's ticking today. My Democratic colleagues have got to determine if we're going to have this vote today. Let's pass it. I yield the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all of you, your service to the country. It matters. There are a lot of citizens of our country right now that have much greater security in their life because of the work that you do and the people that are working around you do. So I just want to say I appreciate that. For the folks in Oklahoma, they would definitely want me to be able to say thank you for your service. Let me ask a couple of questions on this. Director Gabbard, let me start with you on this. Iran has been listed as one of the top sponsors of terrorism for a very long time. They are the primary armors of Hezbollah, of Hamas, of the Houthis. They're arming the Russians to be able to kill Ukrainians. They continue to be able to destabilize the region. And just in the recent days, when many nations in the Gulf region have talked about how to provide greater stability, Iranian leadership stepped out and made very clear statements. They want a one-state solution for Israel, and it's to drive out all Jews. So this continues to be an issue not just for the region, but for Americans in particular. So my question is on this is the sanctions and the effect of sanctions, what we know about the Iranian response. Under the Biden administration, those sanctions will turn down, where, quite frankly, Iran has been able to sell $90 billion in oil on the global market to be able to rearm itself and all the others around the region. Now sanctions are now going back on to Iran again. What do we know about the effect of those sanctions?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. These sanctions have just begun to be reinstated, so the full effects have not yet borne fruit. But the message that the president has sent with his maximum pressure campaign is certainly heard. As the chairman mentioned in his opening remarks, President Trump recently sent a letter to the leader of Iran expressing his interest in direct talks in order to try to de-escalate and to prevent war, prevent Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon, but also stated that there would be military consequences if there was no direct negotiations. So President Trump is continuing to carry out his vision and mission of peace through strength, acting in the best interests of the American people. We will see what choices are made from here.
Okay, thank you. Director Patel, during the last administration and the very open border policy that they had, we had some years, including 2022 and 2023, where there were 70,000 individuals that were released into the country that were identified as special interest aliens. This is something this committee and the Homeland Security Committee tried over and over again to get details on. The Biden administration was unwilling to be able to share any of the details on the special interest aliens, led to a great amount of frustration. The comment came often back to us is that FBI is going to track all these individuals and to be able to identify them, even though it was 70,000 a year that were coming into the country. You just walked into this position and trying to get your feet on the ground in so many different issues that are outstanding on that. I raised to you the issue of individuals that are currently illegally present in the country going through a process, but are listed as special interest aliens. By definition from the administration, those are individuals that we don't know their level of risk, but they're considered a national security risk, but we don't know anything else about them from there. So how are you trying to get on top of the number of people that are criminal aliens in the country, but also these special interest aliens that come from terrorist areas?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your question. As far as the FBI is concerned, you hit on it, criminal. So we are focused across our interagency partners at DHS, ICE, CBP, CIS, and elsewhere to identify through our information sharing networks that we have stood up with state and local law enforcement to provide us the details on any criminal evidence relating to any of the individuals you highlighted. And if there's a nexus there, a case will be opened, by the line agents who predicated lawful and factual basis to do so. And we will further refer that matter to the Department of Justice for prosecution. We are reviewing all of these cases anew, and we will report back to you, Senator, with some fidelity on the outcome of that process.
Okay, thank you. Are you getting good feedback from social media technology companies and cooperation from them on illegal activities that are promoted on their site? All the different sites have rules and standards for what can and can't be done on that. But for instance, in the border areas, Many of the sites are allowing child trafficking, or they're allowing basically the hiring of Americans to come be drivers and such, and they know this is being circumvented. Are they working with you on that to be able to take illegal content off their sites?
Thank you, Senator. And we have engaged directly at the top levels of all the private sector software communities and social media companies, and they have been very helpful because they have been told that this is a priority for me at the FBI to work with them because they have so much information to share back with us. Now, that's, of course, just on the public systems. We're not talking about the dark net.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heinrich. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. You've got a lot on your plate, and appreciate the focus right now on this. Let me come from a perspective of a lot of Oklahoma farmers and ranchers and manufacturing folks and retail folks, and quite frankly, folks that sell to retailers that are in Oklahoma. They've got several questions that they've actually sent to me pretty quickly, so I want to be able to bounce a few of those. The goal of this is to do more trade internationally, that the United States would be able to manufacture here or produce here and sell more internationally, and that we would have that opportunity to have increased market access. Is that correct?
So, Senator, I think that's accurate, because when we're trying to get down a deficit and have more production here, necessarily part of it is making sure we're not getting too many imports that are driven by unfair trade practices, but also promoting our exports overseas.
So then right now there's a lot of negotiations going on. There was a lot of questions for several days whether we're negotiating or not negotiating. I'm hearing from you pretty clearly today. We are open to negotiate. We're trying to be able to establish better trade agreements to be able to move forward. Do you have any timeline on certain countries or places that you have set internally to say we hope to have negotiations complete by this point? Obviously, negotiations can extend as long as they have to, but is there a timeline you're dealing with?
So the president has indicated that he's willing to negotiate with parties that want to pursue reciprocal trade with the United States. We don't have any particular timeline set on that because, as you pointed out, Senator, the outcome is more important than setting something artificially for us. What I can say is I'm moving as quickly as possible, and a lot of these countries are moving very quickly, and we're working on the weekends, we're working at night as folks want to engage on this. Now, I will say, I know you want to ask something, the trade deficit has been decades in the making, and it's not going to be solved overnight.
Right. Yeah, everyone understands that well, and everyone that I talk to is grateful that we're actually attacking the trade deficit issue and try to be able to bring down barriers to trade. They also want to get a timeline. Let me give you, for instance, I've got an Oklahoma company that several years ago spent millions of dollars to be able to move out of China. They moved into Vietnam for production because literally what they're producing, the parts were not created in America. So they were looking for other places to go. They spent all the money, spent all the time, shifted out of China, got to Vietnam, and established there. Now they're saying we've got giant costs in Vietnam at this point. So they're going to have to renegotiate with every single retailer that they sell to, which is going to take a lot of time to be able to do it. What they're trying to be able to figure out is, do we hold on those negotiations and try to renegotiate with Walmart and Target and Costco and everybody else they're going to have to renegotiate with? Or do they press on with those negotiations now? If things are going to get resolved soon, they can pause. If they're not going to get resolved, they're going to have to renegotiate every contract again to try to figure out which way to go. So the time piece does matter to them.
Senator, I understand completely. And Vietnam is one of those countries that understands that it is, frankly, one of the major targets of this action, because their trade surplus with us is so lopsided. I think it's every $15 they export to us, we send them $1, and they remain closed to our exports where we can be competitive, agriculture, et cetera. But they've come to the table with an offer, right? We didn't go out and say, please come talk to us. They beat down our door and they want to talk about it.
I don't anticipate that we're ever going to have equal trade with Vietnam. We're a much larger economy than they are, but bringing down the trade barriers would be helpful so that they would accept American products to be sold there. I think that's beneficial, but most countries in the world are never going to buy as much as we're purchasing because we just purchase a lot more from there. Another issue has come up about garment manufacturing. Obviously, this is a challenge. We'll have different pieces that are bought from different countries. We don't have a lot of garment manufacturing here in the United States. For those garment manufacturers that are here and for others, some in Oklahoma, they're asking me about exclusions and exceptions and how this is going to be handled to say, we can't buy it in America. This is the only place that's actually manufacturing it. I know long-term, the hope is to be able to have a more diversified, but in the short term, they don't have another option. How do you plan to handle that?
Senator, the president has been clear with me and with others that he does not intend to have exclusions and exemptions, especially given the nature of the action. If you have Swiss cheese in the action, it can undermine the overall point, which is to get rid of the deficit, achieve reciprocity. To my point earlier to Mr. Bennett, the Western Hemisphere countries have a much lower tariff than many of the Asian countries, and I've heard from textile manufacturers for many years that they would love to have a situation where Western Hemisphere textile and garment manufacturing is more competitive, and maybe we're setting up the conditions for that.
So in the short term, there's no exemptions that are coming on it. So for companies that are currently buying from Asia at this point, whether it be for textiles, whatever it may be, the goal is to be able to push them out of Asia into the Western Hemisphere, or where do they need to go at this point?
Well, the president has been clear, again, that he's not doing exemptions or exceptions in the near term. My own sense is, given the tariff differentials between Asia and Western Hemisphere, I think people can start making decisions based on that.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks.
We're going to have to move on to Senator Lankford.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Pleased that you're going through this process. You both have incredibly difficult tasks that you've been asked by the president to be able to do. You have great resumes to be able to do it and great backgrounds for this, so I appreciate you stepping up. It is a tremendous sacrifice for your families to be able to do this. So just from the people of Oklahoma, I wanted to say thank you for going through the process on this, because it's really important. I do want to make two quick side comments, because it has been interesting to me the last week or so to hear all the conversation about tariffs, and I'm not a big fan of tariffs. Tariffs are a good negotiating policy to me to be able to try to get down non-tariff barriers and other trade barriers that are out there. So it's a great negotiating piece, but at the end of the day, I want to try to get tariffs as low as we possibly can. But it is interesting to me that a number of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that have talked about tariffs right now, when the tariffs that were put in place under the first Trump administration, President Biden kept all of them, and apparently thought they were a good idea and had lots of opportunity to be able to change those, but instead he agreed with them. And that has been an interesting rewrite of history of late on this, but I'm grateful that we've got folks that are engaging, trying to negotiate. Mr. Kimmett, I do have a question, though, about how we're going to deal with some of the negotiations. I've got a lot of companies in Oklahoma that they deal with Chinese or Turkish or Indian or other challenges that they have where they're producing a product, but then other entities will then dump product into the United States at a much cheaper rate, often subsidized internationally, and they dump it into our market, and it drives down the benefit for American companies or drives them out of business entirely, and they're trying to survive it. The challenge is, if you're a really big corporation, you can fight that. If you're a small to mid-sized company and foreign actors are dumping, we have anti-dumping laws and rules on it, but it costs those smaller companies millions of dollars in litigation, years of time to be able to work through it, and they've got to be able to actually get the documents from a foreign company to be able to prove that the foreign company is actually dumping in. There's just a lot of barriers in this and a lot of bureaucracy. My question is, when we can clearly see, and you're a small to mid-sized company, you can clearly see there's dumping, how do we decrease the bureaucracy, decrease the cost, speed up the process so we can hold foreign entities accountable and have American companies that are standing up for their own rights and know that an administration is standing up on their behalf?
Thank you for the question, Senator, and I agree. If confirmed, I would be honored to oversee the Enforcement and Compliance Division at ITA, which plays a vital role in countering dumping and countervailing duties. I think it's important that that unit has the resources they need to process these matters quickly, to bring meaningful relief to U.S. industries. And certainly I am aware that there is legislation that's being contemplated. The Leveling the Playing Field Act, I think, touches on this, and I would absolutely welcome engagement with you, your team, and this committee on the bringing more efficiency to that process to bring quicker relief to small and medium-sized businesses in particular.
Well, it'd be extremely helpful. We're glad to be able to partner with you on this. This matters to the entire country, every small to medium-sized business. Quite frankly, your giant corporations, they'd love to have some help on it as well, so it's not so much legal costs, and they can actually get their moment to be able to actually get it resolved. But small to medium-sized companies especially, this is a huge issue. The other issue is just foreign entities deliberately mislabeling products when they're coming in, using a different code, all the different things they're doing, combining packaging in to try to hide what they're doing, so they're not paying duties coming in. Once it's actually discovered, though it may have just absolutely crushed an American company in the process because they've undercut them, the penalty seems to be just back paying the duties, but the American company is still crushed in the process on it. So all those jobs were lost. All the benefit of it to the United States was lost. If they win, the American taxpayer still wins back the duties, but the American worker does not. How do we fix that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think we certainly, if confirmed, I would work with CBP to address that issue on the front end to bring stronger enforcement to prevent that from happening, but absolutely would look at the circumvention authorities and all legal authorities that could bring the relief needed, particularly to a damaged U.S. industry. And again, I would welcome the opportunity to work with you, the committee, your staff, to think of creative legislative solutions to that problem.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate both of your help in this. There's a lot that needs to be done. There's about 70 countries that are all knocking on America's door right now saying we're ready to negotiate. I would tell you my farmers and ranchers, my manufacturers, all of them are eager for that because they've been blocked out of markets all over the world, and they are eager to be able to get a balanced, level playing field so they can get a chance to be able to compete and stop having countries get a chance to be able to block them out from selling their goods and products there. So appreciate all the work that you're planning to be able to do on it. Look forward to voting for you.
Just very quickly, and then I'm going to go to Senator Warren, but all the tariffs I've talked about are new Trump tariffs, and in fact, we just
Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. President, I have 6 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and the minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, spent last weekend along our southern border again, as I have done many weekends to be able to get down their border in different areas. Last weekend, I went down to the San Diego-Tijuana border area. That area, there's 1.3 million people living in San Diego. That city bumps right up against our border with Tijuana. Tijuana, Mexico has over 2 million people living in that town. There is a 30-foot fence that actually separates the two there. That is a double-section fence. It is incredibly important to be able to manage that border, not only for the crossing of traffic illegally, but also for the crossing of legal traffic. It's one of the largest ports and traffic movement of people and cargo in the world is right there. And it's an incredibly important location for us. I went there to be able to see the implementation of the new authorities and the things that the president is actually implementing there that has so precipitously dropped the movement of illegal immigration and has dramatically increased the number of interdiction of drugs that are moving through that area that literally benefits the entire country. What I found when I visited with the folks from CBP was that morale was up and the chaos is down. I found folks that are there that are law enforcement professionals actually doing law enforcement. When I visited with some of those same folks before, during the Biden administration, they were being treated like hotel check-in staff that were being asked to actually just move people into the country as fast as possible. Now they're actually able to do their job, to actually enforce the law, to do what they signed up to do. And they're eager to be able to protect the nation and know full well the threats that we are facing. That area in San Diego, we've had more what are called special interest aliens move through that area of our border than any other area of our entire 2,000-mile-long border with Mexico. People from Russia and China, from Central Africa, from Uzbekistan and multiple other places fly into Tijuana and then literally drive up to the gap in the fence and walk across right into the United States. At least that's how it used to be. That's not what's happening anymore. So I want to be able to talk through with this body a few of the things that I saw there and the work that is still undone. One, that section of the gap in the fence, it's right there at Tijuana on the eastern side of San Diego. That gap is still there, but something has changed. Construction is beginning to be able to close that gap. And it's incredibly important. It's one of the first places that CBP and Border Patrol took me and pointed out to say, we need this gap closed. It's very important that we actually get this gap secured because it's in a very remote area, difficult to traverse, and it's dangerous for our Border Patrol folks to have to be able to chase someone through that area. In fact, while I was in that area around that gap, I literally watched one of the Lakota helicopters come in and to be able to identify someone who was literally cutting through that area and smuggling right through that zone. The good news is things are different now. That person was caught because we have the manpower in place to be able to catch them, and that person will be deported immediately. That's also a big change that's actually occurred. So things are different in what's actually happening there, and grateful to be able to see the chaos going down and the morale and the enforcement going significantly up. That gap in the fence will be closed in the days ahead. And it's one of many requests that the Border Patrol has. Just help us have a deterrent in this area so that we can better patrol and to be able to chase folks down that are violating American law. They need additional personnel as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. They need additional resources to be able to do their task, and they need additional authorities to be able to make sure they can fully execute the law that is put in front of them. Something that was interesting, the multiple times I've been down the border the last several years, often Border Patrol would tell me they can't put checkpoints up anymore. They used to have checkpoints on the major highways as they were headed north away from the border, and they would check vehicles for people that were being smuggled and drugs being smuggled in the country and other contraband. They weren't able to do that because they were asked to actually go to the border to facilitate people coming in, and so they could no longer do those checkpoints. Well, guess what? Those checkpoints are back up again. They're actually stopping people on the highways now to be able to check and see if there's drugs there that have found their way across the border and are moving north. And they're interdicting narcotics again there. They're able to actually process a lot faster on turning people around, to have the people in the checkpoints and to be able to do the enforcement because the numbers are so precipitously lower than what they used to be. What does that mean side by side? A year ago, some days we had 12,000 people a day that were illegally crossing our southern border. 12,000 people a day. Last week, most days were around 200. In fact, for the first time that I can remember in a very long time, when I checked in at the Border Patrol station and was talking with them about where things were going and how things were going and what's changed, as we walked past the area they would typically check in unaccompanied minors, that room was empty. I can't remember the last time I walked past and there were 0 unaccompanied minors that were there. The border is being enforced. It's bringing some sanity to our southern border. It is an enormous help and change. But there are a couple areas for cartels that are obviously money-making organizations that they're very focused on what they're going to do next. Literally, right there at the port of entry, they've discovered a tunnel being dug directly under the port of entry to be able to smuggle drugs and people in. Now, our teams were able to find it, identify it, and they're going to shut it down. But the cartels continue to be able to move and to be able to find other ways. We should make no mistake. Just across the border from San Diego, there are 3 active criminal cartels that they're ruthlessly killing each other. They're ruthlessly killing anyone that would try to cross the border without paying their fee. And they're determined to bring violence to northern Mexico and chaos to the southern United States and push as much drugs as they can possibly into our country. We should make no mistake about that. They're determined to be able to do that, and we should do whatever we can to be able to stop that violence and that chaos. The other thing that came up over and over again was now that the southern border, the land border, is being shut down, the cartels not only drilling tunnels now, but they're also putting folks in jet skis and in panga boats, taking them out into the Pacific and trying to be able to come around the maritime barrier and to be able to drop off somewhere on the California coast. Just this week, we had a smuggler that was smuggling folks in a panga boat just on that exact route that capsized in the Pacific and multiple people died. Our Coast Guard went and responded and rescued multiple people as well. Those folks will be processed and they'll be returned right back to Mexico again. But that's the kind of danger these folks face to be able to come across. The cartels don't care about the people that they're moving. They just care about the dollars. They don't care about America. They just care about pushing drugs into us. and so that they can make more and more money. I had the opportunity to be able to do a ride along with some of the Coast Guard and to be able to see firsthand some of the things that they're doing. They need additional resources. This body should pay more attention to the Coast Guard. They're not only important for our national security from foreign threats coming at us, but for our port security and for rescues that are off coast. But they're also being pushed really hard right now by the cartels trying to be able to smuggle drugs and people into the United States. And the Coast Guard needs this body to be able to stand alongside of them so they can do their job. They're remarkable people that are literally out there every single day working to be able to help our country. And I was exceptionally grateful to get time with them to be able to see what their day looks like, how things are going, and the important work that they're doing. As Border Patrol is seeing fewer coming across land border, Coast Guard is seeing more. And so we've got to pay attention to all areas of our border. I did note a couple things that I've read that was interesting to me to be able to actually go down and to be able to see. Because I've seen all these media reports, all these different pieces of fake news that are coming up, or all these different challenges about what the Trump administration is doing in our border. So let me just highlight, I could highlight a bunch of them, but let me highlight a couple of them that came up. I've heard over and over and over again that the Trump administration is not honoring due process. They're not honoring due process. They're ignoring the Constitution to be able to do that. Interestingly enough, just last week, President Trump's DHS released an extensive release that they called 100 Days of Fighting Fake News. One of the items that they listed as the fake news is that they are fighting is that aliens don't go through a process. Their statement, they do, according to the Constitution. Secretary Rubio also made that same statement on Meet the Press recently as well, saying everybody goes through due process. Everyone has a process. Illegal aliens do not have rights like American citizens. No one's denying that. That's a fact. But there is a process they're being taken through, and the law is being followed. I watched it personally. When people come across our border illegally, here's what's actually happening along our border. They're arrested. They're being instructed by law enforcement that they violated American law, that they're not legally present, and they're being immediately turned around and sent back to their country. That is the legal process. For individuals that were coming in from China, and I saw several that were actually being processed through that, they're being detained, then they're being put on the next plane out. Special interest aliens aren't being released into the country anymore like they were under the Biden administration by the thousands. They're now being sent back to their countries as exactly should be, following the exact legal process that it should be done. And I saw for the first time in a very long time a legal process being done that if you cross our southern border and you've been deported before, which is why we don't just grab them at the border and turn them around, we actually get fingerprints, we get information on people in the processing. If you're coming a second or a third time, I watched the prosecution of U.S. attorneys actually prosecuting individuals there through that process, getting them a felony, and then putting them on a bus back to Mexico again. They're following the law. They're going through exactly what the process is doing. They are doing the legal process. I also heard over and over again this fake news about our military going down and our military taking over our border. I actually got a chance to be able to meet some of our military down there. They're doing pretty remarkable work along our border. We've got engineering groups that are there that are helping beef up that border wall, finding areas where folks are finding ways to be able to scale a 30-foot wall and finding ways to be able to strengthen that wall to make sure that never happens again. That's some of our military engineering groups doing that. I watched that Lakota helicopter that I mentioned before. That Lakota helicopter is actually a military helicopter. Their job's not to arrest, that's federal law enforcement on the ground that's doing it. But they're able to be an extra set of eyes in the air to be able to identify folks that are getting around those gaps in the wall, smuggling in people and smuggling in drugs. So our Border Patrol can focus in on those areas. I watch members of our military sitting at a workstation with the Coast Guard at the port area, helping monitor the different cameras that are in our port area, looking for those jet skis and those panga boats that are smuggling in people and drugs. They're doing a great job, and I'm grateful those folks are there. But this body needs to have a further conversation about how do we move more Coast Guard folks there that they can take on that job, allow our military going back to doing their first job, how we can actually reinforce some of the resources that are needed so that our military can do their first task and our DHS folks can do their first task. So yeah, it's more fake news that our military is there actually being law enforcement. They're not being law enforcement, but they are helping our law enforcement to make our law enforcement even more effective. I'm grateful to be able to see the numbers drop so much and allowing our law enforcement to go back. And if I can just make this one last statement, I won't ever forget standing at that port, which is incredibly busy. Lots of trucks coming through, lots of customs screenings and all the things that are happening. And I asked some of the customs folks there, what's changed? And they said, we're able to catch a lot more drugs now than we were able to catch because we've got more time to focus in on catching those drugs. This is going to make a huge difference in America for us to be able to focus on illegal activity coming across our border. When those numbers drop, we're able to go more after what is the worst of the worst coming into our country. I am grateful to see the work that's happening on our southern border. We all should go see it. With that, I yield the floor.
Secretary Noem, good to see you again. Thanks for your leadership and the work that you've already done, and there's a lot more still to do, but y'all have had a pretty remarkable start in the process. And very grateful. For 4 years, every single hearing we ever had with any DHS official was dominated by border, close it, close it, close it, close it, and excuses why they couldn't. It's kind of fun for me, actually, to be able to sit here and hear a conversation about FEMA, about Coast Guard, about all the other aspects of DHS that's out there, Secret Service, when all we had time to talk about was about border in the previous time. I had my team pull together just the March numbers for the last 4 years of border crossings. And what happened? If we go back to March of 2022, 222,000, 2023, 193,000, 2024, 189,000, and then this last March, 11,000. And to be able to see the dramatic difference that's happened in a very short period of time in the enforcement that's actually happened, it's given a deep breath to the nation. It's also given an opportunity for the folks at the border to catch up. I was in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, meeting with the Border Patrol folks in CBP and Coast Guard. They're in San Diego and their enforcement around the Tijuana border, and to be able to see what's happening. And the morale there is dramatically different, dramatically different from the times that I've been there in the past. You had mentioned Coast Guard as well, and I want to be able to just highlight that. Then I've got a whole bunch of other questions I want to go through, but I just want to say thank you to you and your team for the work that's been done. The Coast Guard folks are getting an additional pressure point there. Folks are getting on jet skis and pango boats and coming around. Coast Guard's not only saving lives, as we've seen in the past couple of weeks even, about some of these pango boats that are coming in that are capsizing out there. Coast Guard's rescuing and actually removing folks at the same time in the process. They've got to have additional cameras. They need different radar systems. They need additional people that are there. I saw some of the DOD personnel that's working alongside Coast Guard folks to be able to assist them from other agencies of DOD. They need additional folks there. So one of the questions I want to ask you was about Coast Guard and the plan. You mentioned that about additional assets, but there are radars, cameras, other things, including personnel that they're going to need help on.
Yeah, I would say the Coast Guard, its mission set is pretty expansive, and most of the time they're not only just doing search and rescue, they're out there doing interdiction on the water. They're also participating with the Navy in securing projects and missions worldwide, and their cutters move faster and help work securing our warships and our aircraft carriers, and it's incredibly important, the work that they do. So we're grateful for that, but we also recognize that they've been neglected for years. They've got cutters that have been delayed. We're outmanned by Russia and China every day in the Arctic region, in the Indo-Pacific region as well. We need more assets, but down on the border specifically, you talked about the fact that these cartels are using faster boats with faster engines and jet skis to outmaneuver the Coast Guard, and that's how they're penetrating into the country and proliferating their drug use and human trafficking. So we're going to continue to get them the assets they need. They need airframe. They've got several that have been grounded because they can't even be maintained anymore. They need cutters, but they also need counter UAS technology. Every cutter could use that. They see drones every day out there on the waters and in the work that they do that they can't find out why they're hovering over their mission set, what they're doing if they're weaponized, and then use that to protect our country. They also need satellite technology. They need new software systems and to be able to interact with law enforcement. Their communications. I talked to one Coastie when I was out spending time with them on the front line, and thank you for spending time with them, by the way, because that doesn't just mean the world to them. I think you learn in a different way truly what their needs are. One was carrying around 2 radios that probably weighed 5 to 7 pounds each. And I said, why are you carrying 2 radios? And he said, well, this one's an old one that doesn't really work, but this one is even older than that doesn't have some of the channels this one has. But, you know, I have to carry 2 of them to cover all my bases. And yeah, I wish we could get the newer one. Then I could put both of these down and it weighs half as much. So this guy's walking around with his belt filled with not only all of his other equipment, but also these radios. And it's that we can't afford to buy him a new radio that was already released 5 to 10 years ago, but we haven't upgraded for these individuals. So some of that stuff could be addressed and is very important for us to do so.
Well, thank you. Thanks for paying attention to that as well. That's going to be vital for us in the days ahead. Just quick comment on a couple of things on this. Our team has reached out to your team. There were a lot of things the previous administration would never turn over to us. We're doing some investigations to try to get data. For instance, on the Parole Plus programs that were done, we could never get any data on that. We're trying to figure out where are those people, what actually happened to all of them. And so we'd like to be able to get some of that information. So we've got several pending requests with your team just to be able to get those things. And the other thing is on the FEMA grants, based on the tornadoes and the storms that have come through much of the Midwest, including states like Kentucky and Oklahoma of late, some of the building resilient infrastructure and communities, some of those grants, there's a hold on, and we're just trying to be able to figure out the future of that. So just some additional information would help our communities to be able to prepare as well. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Absolutely.
Senator Blumenthal.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered read a 3rd time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to talk about 2 separate issues that seem to be confusing in our current climate at this point. The first of those is something called nationwide injunctions. Now, for folks that don't track this issue of nationwide injunctions, they have no idea what this means. I would tell you it is a fairly recent thing. We have 3 branches of government. Any civics student in middle school knows that. We have the legislative branch, we have the executive branch, and we have the judicial branch, and all 3 have unique roles. The legislative branch that we're in right now, we write the law. The executive branch executes the law. Judicial branch interprets the law. Now, we know there's a difference between the House and the Senate. The Senate has a responsibility and the House has a responsibility, and they're different, but they're both in the legislative branch. Judicial branch also has different pieces as well, just like the legislative branch. There's a Supreme Court. We know that. It's right across the street. There's 9 justices that sit there, and they're the final decision maker on what the law says. But there's also daughter courts. There's circuit courts below the Supreme Court, and below the Supreme Court, there's district courts. District courts are scattered all over the country. And those individual small district courts that are scattered all around the country, those individual courts, they make a decision on the person that's in front of them. Now, again, this is fairly simple civics. When you have a federal case in front of you, you go to the district court and you file and you get time in front of a judge. Now, it may take time to be able to get there, but they make a decision on what is in front of them. That's what district courts do. They don't make decisions on something that's in a different state. The fine judges that are in Oklahoma make decisions about the case that's in front of them in Oklahoma. They don't decide a case in Indiana because they're not in Indiana. And it's not a case filed in front of them. It's only the case filed in front of them in Oklahoma. Now, if there's a dispute about that, it can be appealed, and it goes up to a circuit court, and it takes in a region, and if there's a dispute even there, they take it on to the Supreme Court. Pretty simple, until the last several decades. You see, prior to 1960, there was no such thing as a nationwide injunction. No one even considered that. But we started seeing this beginning point where a district judge in a court in a single state would hear a case and to say, this is so big, I'm not going to let this go to the circuit court or to the Supreme Court. I'm going to, in my lowest court in the federal structure, I'm going to decide for the entire country, not just the person in front of me. And there were just a few that happened at that time, and the Supreme Court kind of looked away because they seemed like big cases. But then it started to rise. During George W. Bush administration, there were 6 nationwide injunctions that were done in these local district courts. Under President Obama, there were 12 nationwide injunctions that were issued. Then under President Trump, the first term, there were 64 nationwide injunctions. As more and more individual district courts decided, I have an opinion, and I'm not going to decide about the case in front of me, I'm going to decide about the entire country. Under President Biden, there were 14 nationwide injunctions that happened. In fact, President Biden's Solicitor General, the one who actually argues to the Supreme Court, warned that nationwide injunctions halt the legal government actions and policies. See, this is not a Republican-Democrat thing. This is a constitutional thing. This is the United States constitutional structure to say what is the role of lower courts, what is the role of a circuit court, and what is the role of the Supreme Court. We as people in our nation, we honor the constitutional construct. And for me, it's exceptionally important that the courts are blind to these issues and that they take action on the case in front of them and not a case that's not in front of them. Senator Grassley has introduced a bill to rein in the use of nationwide injunctions. His legislation is called the Judicial Relief Clarification Act. It makes it very simple. It is an important case, or is an important piece of legislation to decide how we're going to handle cases like this. It is very simple. Courts decide the cases in front of them. That has been the practice up until the early 1960s. We need to get it to be back to the practice again. Not a Republican issue, not a Democrat issue, a constitutional issue. Nationwide injunctions are a backdoor way for judges to actually write legislation and to bring the decision of the executive branch to a halt. The executive branch does have checks and balances, as does the legislative branch, as does the judicial branch. Those checks and balances are clear. If the executive branch does something inconsistent with the Constitution, it goes to our federal courts and quickly works its way up through the district court, circuit court, to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the one who checks the executive branch, not each district court around the country. It is the Supreme Court. And we need to be able to get back to that process in the days ahead. That needs to be done. So I'm looking forward to seeing Senator Grassley's piece of legislation actually move. A second issue. This body for the last week has had a conversation about CRAs, and most of Americans would just flip the dial and go, I don't even know what that is. Well, the Congressional Review Act is a CRA. It's actually only existed in the last several decades as Congress found a reason to do oversight of the executive branch, especially when the executive branch writes what's called a midnight regulation. Now, that doesn't mean they wrote it at midnight. That means they wrote it and put it in place at the very end of a presidency. A Congressional Review Act says if there's a piece of regulation that's put in place, a rule that's done by an agency, and it's put in place, especially when there's a change in Congress and the White House, that the next Congress and the next White House can look at it and say, yeah, that's out of bounds. That's too big. That needs to be stopped. It was actually first used under President Bill Clinton. He put in what's called an ergonomics rule that literally changed the rules for every keyboard, every desk in America that would be produced. It was a giant rule they did at the very end. The next Congress came in and said that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And by the way, why should we in the federal government care what everyone's desk is like? Let people choose on that. And that simple statement, that simple first time that it was actually used, has started a process now of saying if an administration at the last minute puts in a rule that Congress then comes in and says you overreached your bounds, we can check it. Now, how do you determine whether it's a rule or not? What's a rule, what's not a rule? Because a lot of times agencies put out guidance or they put out orders, they put out all kinds of things. The Congressional Review Act is very specific. It says you can only take action on this when it is actually a rule. Well, there's two different ways that that's determined, actually. One is how much is it going to cost the entire economy? If it's over $100 million that it's going to cost the economy, it's a rule. It's going to have a massive effect across the entire economy. The second way is pretty straightforward. The Government Accountability Office, you'll hear it often referred to as GAO, in 2018, they came out and wrote their legal decision and said it can either be a big thing that costs $100 million across the government, or I'm going to quote GAO in this and their decision that the CRA, the Congressional Review Act, gives agencies the primary responsibility for determining which agency actions meet the CRA's definition of rule. In other words, agencies get the first option to say, is this a rule or is this not a rule? If an agency says it's a rule, it's a rule. That's what GAO said. They came back a couple of years later and rewrote an updated document. GAO came out again and said in their legal opinion, when an agency submits a document to our office, that is GAO, to our office under the CRA, we consider that to be the agency's determination that the document is a rule under the Congressional Review Act. Now again, everyone's glazing over on this because this just seems like legalese. Why are we even talking about this? Well, because it's been in the news this week. Because something unique happened. In 2022, the state of California put in a request to the Biden administration and said, we want to do a rule that's different in our state for electric vehicles than the rest of the country. Now, you may say, well, they can't do that. Well, actually, interestingly enough, California can. California is the only state in America because they had environmental rules even before the Clean Air Act was done. And so California got a waiver, basically, to say if your rules are at least as strong as the Clean Air Act, you can have your own rules, but you have to ask permission. So that's part of the law that was originally written on the Clean Air Act. So California approached the Biden administration in 2022 and said, we'd like to have an even stronger rule on emissions and on vehicles. We want to have a rule that says by 2026, 35% of all vehicles have to be zero emission, or that is electric vehicles, by 2026. Now, they asked for this in 2022. So they said within 4 years, we want 35% of all the vehicles sold in California to be zero emission. And by 2035, we want 100% of all vehicles to be electric vehicles, to be zero emission vehicles. Now, they asked for that in 2022, as I mentioned before. The Biden administration took a look at it, and in 2023, the Biden administration sat down with the GAO, Government Accountability Office, and they started working on the text for this. And the specific question was, how could we make sure that this is not a rule, this is an order? And for months, they worked to be able to shape the language, to be able to make sure it was an order, not a rule. And then the Biden administration sat on it and did nothing with it. In the meantime, 11 other states said, if California does that for electric vehicles, we're going to do that as well. Because here's the other thing about the law I didn't mention. The way the Clean Air Act gave permission to California to be able to do their own rules, the Clean Air Act is also written to say, if other states want to adopt the California rule, because it's at least as strong as the national, other states could do it. So in the next few months from 2022 and 2023, 11 other states adopt this rule. Suddenly, this is not a single state issue. This is a national issue. In fact, it would now affect 40% of all the vehicles sold in America. This just shifted. This is not about one state anymore. This is almost half the vehicles sold in America now are going to have a new set of rules. Biden administration sat on that request. They didn't move on it. Now, they'd gotten their opinion worked out with GAO in 2023, but they didn't move on it, quite frankly, because the American people hate mandates. We don't like them at all. We like choice. We like to make our own decisions. I would dare say everybody in this room uses a different kind of ink pen because we all like our choices and options. We drive different cars. We wear different colors of ties and different shoes because we like our options. The Biden administration knew most American people would hate this rule because it suddenly created a nationwide mandate for what kind of car you could buy, and it had to be electric. So they sat on it. After the election was over, in late December of 2024 and into January of 2025, the Biden administration dropped their quote-unquote order and gave California permission now to be able to do zero-emission vehicles. By 2026, next year, 35% of vehicles that have to be sold across 12 different states were going to have to be zero emission, which would dramatically change car sales in America. They did it after the election. That is the very definition of a midnight regulation. That is the very definition of a rule. It meets both criteria. It's well over $100 million of impact onto our nation, and it affects multiple states. So when the Trump administration came into office, the Environmental Protection Agency immediately re-upped this, and they laid down and said, that's definitely a rule. That's a rule. The agency declared it. Now it's definitely hit both definitions. The agency declared it's a rule, and it's over $100 million of impact. But then a letter went to GAO. Remember I said in 2023 they had worked with the Biden administration? Someone in this body wrote a letter to GAO and said, hey, that thing you worked out with the Biden administration, do you still have that in a file? And GAO sent a letter back and said, well, we declared this in 2023 just an order because it only affected one state, just California. Here's the problem. GAO, as I mentioned at the beginning, in their very own legal opinion, said if an agency says it's a rule, and GAO doesn't even get involved. Literally, GAO broke its own legal opinion to now declare it's an order. Why would they do that? Well, they would do that to prevent this Congress from speaking to that rule. It would no longer be under the Congressional Review Act. I told you this was technical, but this was a fascinating little plot that went from 2022 all the way to the present to try to figure out how to get an electric vehicle mandate in America without ever having a vote in Congress. It was slick. It was well-shaped, except it was dependent on one thing, GAO breaking its own legal opinion. I happened to call the leadership of GAO just last week and said, as far as you know, has GAO ever declared something not a rule when the agency said it was a rule? And after a moment of silence, he responded, as far as I know, GAO has always deferred to the agencies until now. They literally broke their own policy. They literally violated their own legal counsel. So now we're in a quandary. GAO has broken their own legal counsel. We have an issue that will have well over $100 million worth of effect onto the country. is now a near nationwide mandate on electric vehicle sales across the country without ever having a vote in Congress. And our Democratic colleague says you can't change it because we worked a way to be able to fix it so you couldn't. That's not true. This body worked extensively with the Parliamentarian's Office. This body worked extensively across the aisle to be able to have conversation, talking with members of the Democratic caucus to say, do you really want to have in your state a mandate that's sitting there? We don't. Not only that, what will this do to our economy across the country? This was not about challenging the essence of the Senate. This was not about breaking the filibuster rule. This was not about going nuclear. This was about confronting an entity that broke its own rules intentionally to prevent this body from acting. This was a decision to make to say, can an agency impose on America a mandate that Congress never spoke to, never? Or does Congress get to speak to this? I would say to you as a member of the United States Senate, the United States Congress is the lawmaking body for the country. The United States Constitution begins with all legislative power shall reside in a Congress, not in an agency that wants to have electric vehicle mandates for every American. That's not how it works. So we worked to make sure that we were clarifying one simple thing. In the Congressional Review Act, in this time, as it has been every time it's been done, and for every time in the future, this one simple question: when an agency says it's a rule, is it a rule? It has been every other time until this time. We clarified that one question. It didn't change the dates of the Congressional Review Act. It didn't change the process. It answered one question that apparently was in dispute, that was never in dispute before, but now appeared to be in dispute. When an agency says it's a rule, is it a rule? And we clarified what has always been, the answer is yes, it's a rule. And then we acted on that. And this body said, no, we will not have a nationwide mandate for electric vehicles across the country. By the way, I don't have any opposition to electric vehicles. If somebody wants to buy an electric vehicle, they should be able to buy that. I think a lot of them look like great vehicles. Buy it if you choose to. But we're Americans. This body should not mandate that everyone has to be able to buy one. This body should make the path that if people choose to buy one, they can. That's setting the rules of the road, saying, here's the definition of a safe vehicle. Pick any one of those safe vehicles you want to be able to have. But we just set the rules of the road and then get out of the way and let people decide which vehicle they want to drive on that road. That's what has happened this week. Now, I understand there's been a lot of bluster and a lot of trying to redefine what actually just occurred. But what has occurred this week is choice for the American people and clarification of what has always been. When an agency says it's a rule, it's a rule. Just like it was last year, just like it is now, just like it will be next year. Technical, but important, because the American people want to follow the United States Constitution and know that all legislative powers reside in this body, not in some other building somewhere down the street. With that, I yield the floor.
Thank you. Senator Lankford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Secretary, thank you for the work you're doing. I want to just make a quick comment on the full expensing piece that you just mentioned. That's something I've worked on now for several years to get us to full expensing. That is fair tax policy to say to folks, if they're buying more equipment, if they're adding it in, if they're investing in their workers and more productivity, that should be able to not have to be depreciated out over years, that should be taken care of that year on it. So I appreciate your comments on that. I do want to switch subjects a little bit and talk a little bit about sanctions. Last year under the Biden administration, best we can tell, the Iranian regime sold about $90 billion in oil. $90 billion. That funded Hamas, that funded Hezbollah, that funded the Houthis, that continued to be able to equip the Russians with Iranian weapons to be able to attack the Ukrainians. This administration has been pretty clear on trying to be more aggressive on Iran because of their nuclear program. We've had a report come out just in the last 24 hours, the International Atomic Energy Agency, saying that Iran has about 900 pounds now of highly enriched uranium, and they seem to be not slowing down at all in their nuclear weapons program. What is your plan at this point for preventing Iran from advancing economically until they stop their nuclear weapons program?
So, Senator, since I arrived in the Treasury building, we have implemented a maximum pressure strategy on Iran, and more importantly, those who trade with them. We have taken many unique steps towards sanctioning, could be something that had never been done before, refiners in China, private companies called teapot refiners. We are also looking to sanction the owners of the refiners and their families if they have property in the U.S. or Western Europe. Just this morning, before coming here, I signed 2 more Iranian sanction orders. So we are exercising maximum pressure. We are trying to track down their so-called shadow fleet, because what happens with sanctions, when you put on sanctions, you create a new market elsewhere. Right. So each time we make a move, they try to subvert it. Our allies in the Middle East, during my trip with the president there, I had substantial discussions with their finance ministries and central banks, and they have been very helpful in making sure that there is no leakage through other Middle Eastern banks, trading companies, or financial entities into the Iranian regime.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that. You and I, when we first met, we talked a lot about sanctions and that authority. It has great impact if you use it wisely. And thanks for a wise use of that. I was in the Middle East 2 weeks ago. In fact, the week after you were in the Middle East, I met with multiple heads of states throughout the entire region. And what I heard over and over again was that they brought out was, please tell President Trump and the Treasury, thank you for relieving sanctions on Syria. That's smart usage of that. Assad is gone, where we put the sanctions on Assad. They kept saying, thank you for giving Syria a chance to be able to form a new government, not under the sanctions of the old government that is now gone. So I appreciate your smart use of sanctions there and the engagement of what President Trump chose to do on that. One other question about sanctions. You've started aggressively putting sanctions on individuals and family members that are connected to these violent Mexican cartels that are trafficking drugs, that are murdering Mexicans, that are leading to the death of Americans in the way they're pushing drugs into our country. You started engaging in that in a way that has not been done in the past to put pressure on these criminal organizations, which we've now listed as foreign terrorist organizations. Tell me a little bit about that and what the plan is now.
Yes, Senator. So by designating these Mexican cartels as FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations, it gives us much more sanctions authority to go after them and their accomplices, both extraterritorially and to look for them in the U.S. financial system. We are working with institutions in the U.S. on our side of the border, specifically 7 counties that are border counties, to make sure that there is no leakage. And we are constantly sanctioning and examining what is going on with the cartels led by the Sinaloa cartel. This fentanyl crisis, the precursor drugs come from overseas. They are made in Mexico, and they are brought into the U.S. And just imagine if there were a terrorist organization that was killing 100 or 200,000 Americans a year. How would we respond to that? Because this is what's happening. These are terrorists.
Yeah. Thank you.
Being here and serving.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lankford.
I would like to have colloquy with the author on this one, just to try to get some additional information. I happen to be the chairman of ethics, so it would actually fall on me to be able to enforce this because much of the bill itself actually comes back to ethics on it. And so I'm trying to be able to track a couple of things. Senator Slotkin brought this issue up of the qualified blind trust. That has been allowed to be able to say, if you are a big stockholder and you have it, you chose to be able to sell yours off. Some others come into it and say, hey, I have stock holdings. I'm not one of those, by the way. They would come in and say, I'm going to put all this in a qualified blind trust. They're prohibited from having communication with them. That person is actually managing it, and they're separated totally. This bill would say, no, you can't do that anymore. So if you have stocks, you can't put that in a qualified blind trust any longer. Why would that be?
A couple of things. Number one, if you have a qualified blind trust and you are a member of Congress, again, you have until the beginning of your next term, should the voters see fit to reelect you.
No, I get that, but then after that, it's prohibited on it. So
correct. So for those who know ahead of time that they're going to be joining this body, they can no longer use qualified blind trust. And the reason for that is, as you know, the rules on qualified blind trusts are not airtight. They're actually very loose. It is very difficult to police. You don't police them, and the Ethics Committee.
Well, the Ethics Committee, thank you for mentioning that. Ethics Committee does police that. So thanks for telling me what I don't do. We do police that, but
you do not police the structure of the blind trust.
We do, actually. Every single blind trust that's actually put in has to be approved.
And they have to, and so before, and you police then the buying and the selling and the communication back and forth between members?
We do police the communication between the members and the individuals of the blind trust. That's correct.
And so you think that that's an effective way? You're saying you think we need no changes now. You think that effectively accounts for any sort of
again, this suddenly sounds like it's personal. You're telling me what I don't do.
No, I'm just asking you a question because what we found over and over is when members of Congress have been investigated for securities violations, they have said over and over, oh, I had a trust. I had a trust. I didn't really know anything about it. And then as it turns out, they're communicating with their trustee, and they say, oh, we're allowed to do that. So you're telling me maybe they violated multiple laws. Here's what I would say. I think that at the end of the day, if you're asking me why do we need to eliminate blind trusts, it's because blind trusts, I think, are often workarounds because they can be structured in multiple different ways, right? There's not one way to structure blind trust, correct? Or there's only one way?
There is a way that you have to structure it if you're in the Senate and going through ethics. Have you gone through that process before?
No, because I don't have any of these securities, James, because when I got elected, I sold all of my trusts and assets. Great. I don't have a blind trust. I practice what I preach. I don't have individual stocks. I don't trade in stocks. I'm not a billionaire, unlike others on this committee. And what I think is the American people are sending us a clear message, and I hope that they are watching this today. They're sending us a message that they want us to behave as they behave.
Right. So I'm just trying to ask some questions. I'm trying to figure out some things on this because of the way that it's shaped. I've got to be able to work through this. I do believe the qualified blind trust works. The folks that you're mentioning, I think, are folks that say, hey, I had a stockbroker, I had somebody that was handling that, but that was not a qualified blind trust. That's a very different structure to be able to have that. There's prohibited communication there. Many of the accusations that have come in the past several years have been somebody else was handling it, but it wasn't a qualified blind trust. So I was confused on why this particular one, because there haven't been accusations on that. That's somebody that comes in with some wealth, which I don't have, which you don't have. Someone with some wealth that comes in and says, hey, this family inheritance, whatever they may have, worked their whole life, got it, they could put in a blind trust over there. This also requires several things here. It requires you sell it rather than just prohibit trades. Several times I've heard you mention, hey, they shouldn't be trading in it. What about individuals that had stocks when they came? Why should they sell it to be able to be here? Why not just have a flat-out prohibition to say you can no longer buy, no longer sell? If you have it, stock market goes up and down, you can't touch it. You have to just leave it there. Why not? What was the decision to be able to say you got to sell it all rather than just you can't trade anymore?
Well, there is a ban on trading that would take effect immediately for all members, not just new members who are coming in, but for all members. So I've been saying over and over that you have until your next term, should you be reelected, in order to divest. But you make the important point that the trading would be prohibited immediately.
Right.
Your question is why even in the next term require people to divest? I think that the answer to that is because you know what you own, presumably. I mean, you know that you have assets in the following securities. That constitutes a financial interest, a pecuniary interest. And it presents a conflict of interest to be getting briefings, voting on legislation, doing these things where you could be increasing or decreasing the value of your portfolio.
We also have farmers that are here in Congress that they vote on farm policy, and they also have ag provisions as well. And so you can't eliminate all provisions that are out there on that. So I'm just trying to be able to figure out, this also has a reporting requirement. If someone has an FHA loan, it has to come back to ethics, or a VA loan, it has to come back to ethics. If they're involved in any of the farm programs, it has to come back to ethics, and we've got to be able to track it. I'm trying to figure out what to be able to do on this. And then it eliminates the ability for someone to own crypto or stable coin. Now, we just passed a bill allowing stablecoin to exist. I'm trying to figure out why stablecoin is now in this as well. That's just a digital asset that has the same value as cash, but it's prohibited in this. I'm trying to figure out why stablecoin is cut out on this.
Well, you say in it now. I mean, it has been in it. It's in the bill that we passed a year ago before the most recent hasn't changed.
Stablecoin we just made the change on, to be able to open up stablecoin in the regulatory basis for all
We didn't
Americans.
make the change in this bill. Congress passed a bill.
I get that. That's why I'm just asking why it's still in this, that there's a prohibition for that kind of digital asset.
Well,
it's just a dollar for dollar. It's the same as owning cash. So if you own a stable coin, that's the same as owning a dollar. It's only worth a dollar. It doesn't change in value. But a member of Congress wouldn't be able to own a stable coin anymore.
Correct, and it's for the same reason, the same pecuniary interest, conflict of interest provisions that we think with individual stock. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere. We drew the line in this place over a year ago when we drafted and passed this bill.
Yeah, but I'm saying a stable coin is worth a dollar today. It's worth a dollar. It's not a tradable asset.
If it will get your vote, James, I'd be happy to change this on the floor.
No, that's what I'm just trying. I'm asking because as the chairman of ethics, I've got to be able to actually.
And if you're concerned that it won't be, and if you're concerned that we won't be able, the ethics committee won't be able to enforce it, we will absolutely work with you. And I know the Ethics Committee is a bipartisan committee.
It is.
And I know that your Democrat colleagues would also be happy to work with you to make sure that we can enforce this. We'll get you the guidance. And I'm happy to work with anybody on the floor who actually wants to change the bill to make it better. I mean, I agree with what Senator Slotkin said. This is not a perfect bill. It's not an ideal bill. Listen, there's provisions of this bill I don't like that much. But here's my bottom line. I've been working on this this is my 7th year now in the Senate. I've been working on it for 7 years. I want a bill that can pass this committee, that can pass the Senate, and that can be signed into law by the president. The ranking member and I worked for 2 years to get the compromise text last time. 2 years. Did I like everything in it? No. But you know what? We passed it through this committee. I just think this issue is too important to play politics with. We could do an easy messaging bill that would never pass. But if you want to really make a change and you want to make law, you're going to have to draw the line somewhere. So having said that, I will absolutely work with you, Senator Lankford, and anybody else who says, okay, you know what, I think this needs to be changed. You look at this and may say, you know what, I don't think these pieces are enforceable.
All right, let's move the debate on.
Wait a minute. I haven't yielded, Senator Paul. This is an important debate. I think we should take all the time that we need. I think it's absolutely vital that we get it right and get it as close as we can. But what I do not want to do, and what I will not consent to, and what I'm going to be very critical of, are attempts to kill it, where it is, well, you know, this is not quite right, so we're going to kill it here. And this is not quite what I want, so we're going to kill it. I don't want to kill it. I want to move it. I want to move it. I want to get this enacted. I want the American people to be able to trust this body. And I think that's why this vote today is so important.
All right, let's move it along. On the question of stablecoin that Senator Lankford brings up, the hope is that someday in the near future, it may be that everything you purchase on Amazon, that stablecoin is a choice. It may be at Walmart you use it. So you're passing a law today that somehow may prohibit anybody in office from shopping on Amazon. So this isn't a very well thought out bill. We have a couple over here. Senator Gallego.
And in case anyone's wondering, I am not the billion.
Colleague Senator Lankford is next.
Thank you. In a moment of earth-shattering bipartisanship, I want to be able to second what Senator Whitehouse was saying, because we experienced the same thing in Oklahoma with a disproportionate payment system for surgeons, physicians, whatever it may be in Oklahoma, based on other states around us on this. And that might have made sense 40 years ago. It doesn't make sense today on it. So that'll be one of the things I look forward to that conversation, be able to figure out on that one. Mr. Stewart, let me continue on with you. You're going to have questions. All of you will have questions that will come up from some of my friends that are here on the dais saying, are you going to follow the law when President Trump asks you to do something? So, Mr. Stewart in particular, since you're the counsel on this, I want to ask you some questions based on what President Biden did when he ignored the law repetitively, and it had a direct effect on my state and on the people in my state. Let me give you some examples. Title X funding is out there, does AIDS testing in rural areas, breast cancer screenings in rural areas all over the country. President Biden's HHS team invented a new standard to say if each state does not promote, not provide, but does not promote abortion in their state, they won't get Title X funds. He followed up with it in my state and cut off funding for AIDS testing, for breast cancer screenings, for all kinds of screenings in my state of Oklahoma, because my state wouldn't bend to his will and promote abortion in the state. They literally wanted us to be able to put a 1-800 number on all the health materials that went out from our health department saying, here's the number you can call to go get an abortion. When we said no, they said no AIDS testing funding for you. There's nothing in the law that says that. They just created that out of thin air. That had a direct effect on the health care in my state. The conscience protection issue is very clear in law, that if a nurse or a physician says to their hospital, hey, I don't want to be a part of an abortion, I don't want to be a part of sex change operations, that violates my conscience, the federal government is to be able to step in and make sure that conscience protection is actually protected. The Biden administration literally told everyone through HHS at the very beginning, we're no longer going to protect people in conscience protections, and then actually create a rule they sent out to hospitals to say, if you're a physician and you don't perform sex change operations, we're going to come down to you, literally violating the law on its face. ORR tried to be able to find new ways to be able to shuttle people to abortion, saying we didn't pay for the abortion, we just drove them there, provided staffing, provided the details. I can go on and on and on with the Biden administration, the way they ignored the law. So my simple question to you is, are you going to work to make sure that this administration follows the law that the Biden administration ignored?
So, Senator, I appreciate that question a great deal. It will be a theme, I believe, in terms of will you follow the law. I have a career that proves I'll follow the law. I believe in the four corners of the law as passed by policymakers, and that the role that I will have is to interpret the law and give good advice to Secretary Kennedy and members at HHS when it comes to interpreting and applying the law. And I believe my job is not to look outside of that and create new law. I believe policymakers do a great job of that themselves.
Yeah. Well, the simple thing here is we're a nation of laws. We want everyone to be able to follow the laws. And we're grateful to be able to have that fixed when previous presidents ignored the law, to be able to say, hey, let's just get back to following the law on this. Mr. Trillo, I want to ask you a little bit. You're going to have a lot of the budget issues and have a lot of big decisions to be able to make on grant making and how that process is going to go. I have noticed that a lot of the decisions for grants, if you go back and look at the grants and the grant decision makers, they're made by the same people year after year after year. And I'm always shocked that when Harvard seems to get a grant every year for the same thing, and you look at the grant decision makers, it's made of all Harvard graduates. Shocking that would happen when there are lots of other universities and lots of other entities doing great healthcare research all over the country that don't get a shot to be able to do it. So my simple question, you don't need to answer it completely today, because I want to be able to poke on this and say, grant decision makers need to change. They need to have fresh eyes that be able to look at it. And if the same people are making decisions over and over and over again on that, it'd be helpful to be able to get some new voices. When you're doing scientific research, getting stuck in a rut doesn't help in that. So I just want to be able to raise that to you as an issue. Is that fair?
Fair, and thank you for raising the issue.
The other issue that I want to be able to raise to you is just the decision about some of the healthcare grants as they're done just in general. There's been a lot of frustration about how some of the dollars go out and how some of the awards are done. So NIH in 2022 did a $350,000 award to develop a smart toilet using AI. Not 100% sure what the AI toilet is supposed to do. There's the federal taxpayers paid for a study through HHS about wearing helmets if they prevent injuries in West Africa. Now, I would tell you for free, wearing a helmet in West Africa has the same health effects that it does wearing a helmet in the United States. It's probably a good idea, but we paid for that. There was a huge study that was done to study the effect of climate change in a specific area of North Africa and its health effects on things. I think most Americans want to say, what are we investing our dollars in? We want good NIH research. We want good research on cancer, so many different rare diseases that are out there that are dependent on us doing the basic research. My encouragement is when you're doing the grant studies and evaluating who gets it, let's make sure we're putting the priorities into the places that needs to be put. Fair?
Fair. Thank you for the question.
All right, thank you.
Mr. President, is the Senate currently in quorum call?
It is not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to tell you a story about Tina Pierce. Tina grew up on a farm in Idaho. She was the first in her family to earn a college degree. After earning her degree in accounting, she served in the United States Marines, where she was deployed to Kuwait as the comptroller for contingency operations at Desert Thunder. She earned her MBA from Colorado State University. She graduated at the top of her class. She then became a CPA, a certified public accountant. She's been married 26 years, just 4 children. Her husband also served in the United States Marine Corps as a colonel. Why do I bring her up? Well, here's why. President Trump nominated Tina Pierce to be the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Energy. She went through the process with the Committee of Energy and Natural Resources, where she was voted out in May of this year, 13-7. Pretty strong bipartisan vote. She passed out of committee and then has sat waiting. What's interesting is the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Energy has actually never had a vote in the Senate on the floor of the Senate. It's always been a position that in the past went through committee, was approved in committee, and then passed on the Senate floor either by unanimous consent, a voice vote, or was put what's called en bloc, grouped together with other nominees and passed all in a group. This is not the Secretary of Defense. This is not the Secretary of Energy or the Secretary of State. This is the CFO for the Department of Energy. It's one of those 1,200 positions that the Senate must confirm, but historically has always been confirmed in a very fast-track process after they pass out of committee, especially when they pass out 13-7 out of a committee. Everyone knows they're going to pass. You see, that's the way it used to be, but not anymore. Mr. President, my Democratic colleagues have determined that Tina Pierce should be filibustered so this Marine, married to a Marine, mom, highly qualified, graduated top of her class, has to sit at home and wait as Democrats block every single nominee on the floor. So she waits since May of this year to see if the Senate can open up enough time to have a vote. Oh, that's not the only one. Jonathan Morrison is President Trump's nominee to the administrator for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Jonathan was the first in his family to go to college. He graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 2001, went on to law school at Notre Dame. He also got a Master's of Laws degree in International Business Law from the University of Chicago, University College in London. Over his career, he's worked with automobiles. He's also served as the chief counsel at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. He is supremely qualified to be able to lead this part of the administration. He came out of the committee in a vote of 16-12, but he also just sits and waits because there's not enough time. In every administration, there are lots of nominees. There's 1,200 nominees, and everyone knows there's so many nominees, and so you pick and choose which nominees you actually want to be able to debate. That's normal in every single administration. They all have to go through the committee process, but when it comes to the floor, you don't dedicate all the floor time to different what are called sub-cabinet officials. Those get fought out in committee, and then they come to the Senate floor, and they either pass en bloc, or they pass by a voice vote or unanimous consent, or if they're highly controversial individuals, maybe we'll have a floor vote on this. So it's been 200 days of this administration. Let me give you some examples of this. What's called a cloture vote, a demand to be able to go through this full, long process. Under Bill Clinton, there was 0 of those. 0. Were there controversial nominees? Sure there were. but they worked through the process on that. Under George W. Bush, 0 cloture votes that were required in the Senate. There were 9 under President Obama, but then under the first President Trump administration, 38 all of a sudden. You know what we did as Republicans? We pushed back. And there were 71 under President Biden. It was kind of a tit for tat. Now our Democratic colleagues have determined this is not going to be tit for tat anymore. We're just going to shut the whole place down. Now under President Trump, 134. What does this really mean? This really means that we're not moving anyone across the floor unless they actually have 3 hours of floor time. That is a vote on a motion to proceed. That is 2 hours of debate time here on the floor for that person, and then another vote after that. It takes a total of 3 hours to be able to do that whole process. 3 hours for every single person when you've got 1,200 people. You would think during that time, that's the 2 hours of debate time, we would have massive amounts of debate, because if these are highly controversial nominees, of course there's going to be debate on this floor to be able to discuss all these highly controversial people. Well, let's talk about that. For these sub-cabinet officials that are there, there's been 109 of them. All of them have been filibustered through the process to say they demand it. The average Democratic debate time for these 109 people has been 2 minutes. Actually, technically, 2 minutes, 12 seconds. So 2 hours of time that they have demanded to debate these highly controversial people, and they've allocated 2 minutes, 12 seconds on average. Well, interestingly enough, 81 of those 109 Democrats actually did 0 debate on the floor. This was just about shutting the Senate floor down. That's all it was. This was about attacking President Trump, not acknowledging the fact that he won the election and that he should be able to actually go through the process to be able to have his staff like every other president has had. Interestingly enough, I've had folks that have said to me, well, how do you actually fix this? How does this get better? Well, the first way this gets better is typically in the past, Republicans and Democrats would sit down together and would say, this is intolerable. We can't actually get to other bills. You see, right now, to be able to do the 3 hours that it takes to be able to move it, just with the nominees that we have in the backlog right now, not counting the 700 more nominees that are still coming in the days ahead, it would take 900 hours the rest of this year to actually move those through across the floor, 900 hours. Well, if you look at the rest of the year, the Senate would have to be actively voting and in process 80 hours a week, every single week, only on nominations. That would mean we would not do the National Defense Authorization, we would not do the 12 appropriation bills, we would not do a farm bill, we would not do an FAA reauthorization, we would not do any tax policy, we wouldn't do anything else except nominees 80 hours a week. If we did that, we could get caught up in the backlog, but oh wait, we have to keep doing that the next year and the next just to be able to maintain this. So when I say this is intolerable and have never been done in the past, that's what it means. The Senate has to do legislation as well as nominations. This is a situation that my Democratic colleagues have broken the Senate structure. We got to figure out a way to be able to fix this that works for Republican or Democrat presidents in the future. Regardless of party, the president has got to be able to move their nominees, and this should not be an issue that once they've gone through committee and been resolved, that they literally can't get to the floor, or that people wait for months and months and months to even get a vote on the floor because there's so little time and we're so backed up. So here's a simple idea. Just like has been done in the past, move folks in groups, just like it's been happening in the past. If you go in the first Trump administration, there were 22 separate votes that were taken, they were called en bloc. Groups of folks that had all been passed out of committee. Under the Biden administration, that happened 17 times, where Republicans allowed Democrats to be able to lump these individuals together to be able to pass them all together. Under this administration so far, 0, none. Under the first Trump administration, 559 of the 1,200 plus people all went through that process. Under Biden's administration, 277. This is Republicans and Democrats alike. Now it's 0. Because my Democratic colleagues, I assume, have just determined they're going to be the resistance. But what they're setting up is a process where in the future, as soon as there's a Democrat president, this is going to be the same thing, because Republicans are just going to go tit for tat on that. That's not right for the country. It's not right for then. It's not right for now. So very simply, we've got to get back to legislating, which means we've got to allow the president to be able to have his nominees go through the process. We have a constitutional responsibility to advice and consent. Let's do that in the committee process. Let's bring those to the floor in a debate. Let's actually pass or not pass those individuals, whatever this body may determine, but let's at least get an up or down vote on every single one of these individuals to be able to get this part of our responsibility checked off. Because this week, we're also trying to work on the National Defense Authorization. That's an essential piece of legislation we've got to get done. By the 30th of this month, we're supposed to have 12 appropriation bills done. But we can't get on appropriation bills, and we can't work on the National Defense Authorization the time that it needs while we're backed up with hundreds of nominees, and my Democratic colleagues are blocking literally a mom and a Marine who's a highly qualified CPA to say they can't be the CFO. Please. This is all about trying to attack Trump, but what they're doing is actually stopping the country from getting its business done. So let's get this fixed. That's my request. My colleagues are coming to the floor in the next hour, all going to make our case why this is so important that we actually get resolved, not sometime, right now we get this resolved. So with that, Mr. President,
Thanks for the work that you're doing to be able to continue to be able to protect the civil liberties of all Americans and for your service to the country. We are grateful as a nation to be able to have folks that are actually engaging these ideas. All of us who flew on a plane during the time of COVID remember full well the experience of the mask on, mask off. I will never forget a particular flight that I was on that literally the flight attendant patrolled up and down the aisle the entire time like a prison guard, watching for anyone that lowered their mask at any point or that got on to children who were with a pacifier or with someone who was a crying baby, and to try to figure out some way to be able to cover that up. This is bizarre to be able to think about that, but to be able to think about our own government at the time was also trying to find people that disagreed with policy during that time period and would say, we want to try to find some way for you just not to fly because you disagree with us. Becomes an entirely different level. So for Mr. Crider, let me ask you a question on this. And Mr. Levitt, if you want to be able to jump in as well, you can on this. Did TSA, how did they make decisions regarding the threat level of individuals on the mask mandate issue? Did they have a ranking for that? How did they determine what is the level of threat for an individual?
Okay. We don't know, and that's the problem. It's because things like this are secret, right? They're not the sort of thing that everyday Americans have insight into. They're not the sort of thing that air marshals, even flying back and forth in these flights, have insight into, and they're clearly not the sort of things that you have insight into. Right. So it begs the question then, who is writing this stuff, and how are we supposed to trust that it's, it has any basis? Clearly, people just expressing a concern about masks is outrageous for them to be put on a watch list.
Yeah. So going back to some of the things Mr. Abe was saying, someone who's visiting family in Pakistan, someone who was a missionary that was flying back and forth to a country that was deemed inappropriate to be able to fly back and forth to, was there a process to be able to actually have a human engaged in that decision-making to say, hey, this person's visiting family members, this person was a missionary, whatever it may be? Was there a human involved in that, or is it just a trigger, you were in a certain city at a certain place, so you're out, you're on the list?
Again, I can only testify to my wife's situation. I had specific knowledge she didn't enter the Capitol. How she got on that list, who said that she entered the Capitol, I don't know. That's well above our access.
I'll add to that. The TSA has tried to say this is just a rule-based program, right? And they give the impression almost that like some computer is just assessing, flight bookings and then spitting these out. But someone made the decision to put, for instance, Tulsi Gabbard's congressional photo on there rather than her passport photo. There was an individual involved, and frankly, someone needs to figure out who that is and ask them a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, there's other members of Congress that have also been placed on the list as well on it. Just and we don't know why or what the reason was. It was just they're a threat. And so they've got to be able to be on this list. TSA has policies that prohibit active collection of information about people. TSA is a receiver of information, not a collector of information. This is clearly TSA trying to be able to collect information. Was TSA in violation of the law? Because they're not managing information giving to them, they were shifting into the collection mode.
I mean, I'll take a stab there. I don't know. TSA has broad authorities, right? And so they don't treat this as intelligence, right? They don't say that it's intelligence as though they observed you doing something. They're just deploying the assets. So I think back to one of the points that's been made here, Congress has given TSA pretty broad authority. That might need to be looked at being constrained more further.
Mr. Sharper, you want to be able to add to that?
Yeah, I won't be able to cite you chapter and verse, but the authorities in the Air Transportation Security Act are very broad. And so it's your intuition is correct that TSA should not be an intelligence collection agency, but if it decides it's going to go off in that direction, the language is so broad it can go off in that direction. That's why one of my recommendations is to bring TSA and other DHS authorities within bounds that Congress sets tightly.
Sharper, you had also mentioned something about a right to travel, and to clarify that. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I think we intuitively feel we have a right to travel. And there are cases from the Supreme Court that say, of course, you've got a right to travel. You can move from one state to another, and they can't deny you welfare benefits when you get there. There are other cases where a man in San Francisco wanted to fly to Washington, D.C. to meet with his representative. And in this case, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals found that you don't have a right to travel on your preferred mode of transportation. He didn't want to go through all the security nonsense, and so challenged there and said, no, you can take a train or you can drive if you want to go to Washington, D.C. A clear right to travel. The Americans believe they have it, but the courts haven't accorded it to them, would give them a position when they went to court where they could do discovery. And some of these things could be turned up. We could learn more about the programs. I think courts would balance well. Obviously, a court is not going to throw out a program that is provably cost effective. And they'll say, yeah, no, in this case, you do have this right, but the right is subject to regulations that allow for security. But the right does not give way to regulations and programs that don't do anything, the regulations and programs that don't actually produce cost-effective security. So that idea, I'm glad you asked about it. I'd like to give it more consideration. Congress can weigh in on that and say, well, no, this intuition of Americans that is somewhat backed by courts can be made a full right. We think it is in Congress. Let's have the courts treat it as such.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
When I traveled, during the pandemic, we all travel several times a week. There were many flight attendants who were very.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, yesterday I came to the floor to warn that a critical cybersecurity protection that has been in place for a decade was set to run out and expire at the end of the fiscal year. I urge my colleagues to pass a bipartisan, clean, 10-year extension to keep these important national security protections in place. Unfortunately, just one of my colleagues objected, and as of midnight, they have now expired. As a result, we are without this critical line of defense. Our economy, our infrastructure, and our government is exposed. It is now going to be a more challenging effort to protect businesses and critical infrastructure against cyber attacks at a time, Mr. President, when you know that our adversary attacks continue to grow more aggressive and more sophisticated. This law was passed with strong bipartisan support, and the support remains strong in both chambers. Even the Trump administration agrees, and the White House and the Department of Homeland Security support a 10-year extension and want to see this bill passed. For months, my colleagues and I have heard from a broad coalition of industry leaders who need the long-term certainty that a 10-year reauthorization provides, so we can protect our systems and they can protect their systems and customers. And that's why Senator Rounds and I introduced a clean, bipartisan 10-year extension all the way back in April. Every hour we delay is an open invitation to cyber criminals and hostile actors to attack our economy and our critical infrastructure. And I would urge my colleagues to put our national and economic security first and pass this clean, long-term extension. As if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S. 1377 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. That the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Reserving the right to object. As Mr. President, as you know, the CISA reauthorization is also included in the clean CR that we're also trying to be able to pass with this continuing resolution. On behalf of Chairman Paul, he has asked me to be able to come and object. So I object.
Heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, the CR has not passed. We are now vulnerable right now. As my colleague from Oklahoma knows, we are now vulnerable. I do not know when that continuing resolution will pass. Every day that goes by, we are susceptible to a cyber attack. Who is going to answer for that when it occurs? Because we did not act here. And we also know that even if the CR were to pass, it's a couple months. We need to have long-term certainty. That's what we've been hearing from all of the folks in the cybersecurity industry. It's why the Trump administration is saying we need to pass a 10-year extension and we need to do it now. It's why members in the House, both Democrats and Republicans, overwhelming support there. There's overwhelming support in this chamber right now. I assume if we had a vote today, it would be overwhelmingly passed. Why do we risk the security of our country from cyber attacks? Why don't we pass common sense legislation? That's what the Senate should do. I know we have issues that we debate all the time, but when there's overwhelming support and the threats to our country are imminent, we should act. And when we don't act, we fail the American people.
Mr. President, we're 7 days deep into a government shutdown. What a ridiculous waste of time. What a painful, ridiculous waste of time for the nation. I can't tell you how frustrating it is because I've been here long enough now to be able to see what the negotiations look like. Let me tell you what it just looks like for the last few years even. Let's go back just through the Biden administration. Every single end of September, as we approached the deadline for government funding, this body had a conversation. Do we want to remain open and continue negotiating, or do we want to shut down? And every single time during the Biden administration, this body said it's harmful to the American people and to federal workers to have a shutdown. Let's keep things open and continue to be able to negotiate. So the end of every September, which is the end of our fiscal year, this body voted to keep the government open and to continue to negotiate. But what happens when the Trump administration comes? Well, during the Trump administration, Democrats have determined that they want to show they're fighting and raging, they're the resistance against President Trump, and so they've determined the best way to do that is just to be able to shut the government down. The same effect happens for federal workers. The same effect happens for the nation. We have the same opinion across the world as the entire world looks at the United States of America, the greatest nation in the world, which is apparently not able to keep its government open. Because my Democratic colleagues have determined they want to show that they are the resistance. Well, who gets to pay the penalty for the resistance? And what does that really look like? We've had several votes that have happened here where we've had what's called a clean continuing resolution. This body knows it well because we voted on 13 of them in the last 4 years. A clean continuing resolution, and passed all of them. It was just a moment to say, can we keep the government open and continue to negotiate? The body determined, yes, let's keep negotiating, but let's not hurt federal workers and their families, let's hurt members of the military and their families, let's not hurt them. Let's keep the negotiating here. So we did that 13 times in just the last 4 years, until now. My Democratic colleagues, as the President knows full well, have brought forward a proposal. Their proposal is titled Continuing Appropriations and Extensions and Other Matters. Now, Ours is just titled Continuing Appropriations and Extensions. Theirs is titled Continuing Appropriations and Extensions and Other Matters. It should make you say, well, what are the other matters? Well, ours just keeps the government open, that is, Republicans just keeps the government open at status quo, where we are. Same level of spending, same functionality, that's where it focuses in on. My Democratic colleagues have brought their own proposal, which is $1.5 trillion in spending addition, and they include a couple new little nuggets in there, and other matters. They throw in like Section 135, which has a new element on carbon management expenditures, dealing with fossil fuels. They have a new section on climate change initiatives that are built into their and other matters. They have Section 154, which is getting additional funding to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They have Section 2306, which allows a new extension of electric vehicles getting access to HOV lanes. These are the demands that they put in to say, we will not reopen the government unless we get electric vehicles into HOV lanes, and additional money for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and carbon management expenditures. And oh, by the way, there was a $50 billion rural health care fund that Republicans passed in the One Big Beautiful Bill. They also want to get rid of that $50 billion rural health care fund, saying we need to wipe that out. Can I tell you, rural hospitals really need the help. $50 billion would really be a huge help for them. We have called that the moonshot to be able to bring rural health care up to the standards that they need to be across the country. They just wiped that out and included that in their in other matters section. To say, yes, we want to open up the government, but we also want to close down more rural hospitals at the same time. Listen, we have disagreements on things. It's not we're just different parties. We come from different states and different areas. We have different perspectives. Welcome to America. We have different opinions on things. That's what this body is supposed to be about. But when we have disagreements, we should be able to actually sit down like grown-ups and talk to each other and figure out how to be able to solve it. That's what actually should be done. This is not a radical concept. This is a pretty straightforward concept. Surprisingly enough, my colleagues have agreed with me in the past on this. Let me just give you some examples. My colleague, Senator Ben Ray Lujan, in September of last year said shutting down the government should be a non-starter. My colleague, Senator Mark Warner, said government shutdowns unleash chaos on federal workers, delay pay for service members, and weaken our position on the global stage. My colleague, Bernie Sanders, said shutting down the government is a serious and dangerous action that we must do everything possible to prevent. Shutting down the government would impact tens of millions of our fellow Americans who would be unable to access government services. My colleague and friend Jackie Rosen said a government shutdown would be devastating to Nevada families. It would increase housing costs, take away food assistance for seniors and children in need. My colleague, Senator Mark Kelly, September of 2023, said a government shutdown would have serious impacts. Service members won't get their paychecks. Airports would have major delays. Nutrition assistance for children could be cut off. We can't let any of that happen. My colleague, Senator Elizabeth Warren, said the least we can do, the bare minimum we can do, would be to pass a continuing resolution to keep the doors open and the lights on. My colleague, Brian Schatz, said, I've seen the same thing over and over again. Shutdowns don't work. My colleague, Senator Gary Peters, said a government shutdown will be a disaster for our economy and for people in Michigan and across the country. My colleague, Tim Kaine, said, I'm a senator from Virginia. Some of the hardest effects of a shutdown would be seen in my state. My colleague, Senator Dick Durbin, has said, negotiating to avoid a government shutdown holds the livelihood of the American people and the proper functioning of this government hostage. My colleague Amy Klobuchar has said shutdowns are not good for the economy. And how about this one? Oh, I've got to find my favorite. My colleague, Chris Murphy, and my friend, made the statement, there's a time and a place to debate health care, just like there's a time and a place to debate energy policy, immigration, and education, but not when funding the federal government and all the lives that are impacted by it hang in the balance. I could not agree more. So we have an opportunity just to be able to open the government up. We have literally a bill on the floor today, just like we had yesterday, that's already passed the House of Representatives, that would just open us up for another 6 weeks now, allow us to be able to get appropriations work done, and to reopen. The same thing we did 4 times during the Biden administration in September, the same thing we've done 13 times in the last 4 years, just to be able to keep the negotiations going and to not have all these consequences. I've worked for years to be able to end government shutdowns. Some of my colleagues that are here on the floor know it full well. We've talked about it before multiple times. I have a bill that's called Preventing Government Shutdowns. It's very straightforward. It just says if we get to a moment like this, instead of federal workers and their families suffering the consequences, we do. We have to stay in session 7 days a week. We can't move to any other bill other than appropriations. And we have to be able to get our work done. It is as simple as if you don't finish your work at class, you have to stay after class to finish your work. But it holds everyone else harmless and puts the pressure on members of Congress where it should be. This is not a controversial issue outside of this body. The last time we had a vote on this bill, we had 56 votes, and one member that was absent that day stated publicly would have voted for it if they'd have been in that day. So we would add 57 votes. We just need 60 to be able to make this thing law, and so that we would literally never have a government shutdown ever again, ever. We would still have the debate on budget issues. We're going to have issues of budget disagreement. That's going to happen. We don't agree on everything. We should have the fights on budget. But we should have the fights here and hold everyone else harmless in the process. We're 57. We just needed 60 votes. And literally this day and this time wouldn't happen. We need to solve this. And we can. We have solved a lot of difficult issues in the Senate. This is not too hard to solve. My friend and colleague, who is the ranking member on appropriations, has worked incredibly hard. Senator Murray has worked incredibly hard on appropriations for years, knows this process can be done well. But the last time we did appropriations in the time and in the order they should have been done was 1997. 1997. So let's fix our process. The entire country is staring at us thinking, can't you guys get this together? Yes, we can. We just have to agree not only to reopen the government, which should be the lowest threshold, but then fix our process of how we actually do this work to make sure that we actually get the 12 appropriation bills done on time, and when we don't, we stay after class until it's done and just stay at it. We can figure this out. There are 100 smart people in this room, 100 smart, stubborn people, but 100 smart people in this room. Let's figure it out together. I yield the floor. Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I'd love to introduce this Senate to a couple that I know. Husband, wife, both work for the federal government. Young couple, expecting their first child. This week, they will miss a paycheck, both of them. You tell me how many people in their early days of marriage, both spouses could miss a paycheck while they're preparing for their first child. But that's the reality that's being faced by that couple, and I'm sure a lot of other folks that stepped up to serve their nation, serving in a federal agency, but because of a government shutdown, they're not going to get paid. I'd love to introduce this body to a single mom that just a couple of weeks ago got the invitation to go to the FAA Academy and to become an air traffic controller. Very difficult to get into that school, but is in the process, has been accepted, is in the process, has quit her job, has canceled her lease, and as a single mom is taking the risk to be able to step out in a new great career. But right in the process of stepping out to do that new great career, there's a government shutdown, and now she has no idea what's about to happen. She's quit her job already. She's canceled her lease already. She was preparing to move to get to the academy. Now what does she do? For all the folks out there that say this government shutdown is no big deal, or as my Democratic colleagues in the House have said, some families are going to have to suffer to give us leverage. Here are the families that are actually suffering to give my Democratic colleagues leverage so they can discuss health care. But let me not just talk about health care they want to discuss. Their focus seems to be on a COVID-era subsidy that they created for the Affordable Care Act to try to make it more affordable, because here's the problem in my state. In my state in Oklahoma, the Affordable Care Act, the cost for it has increased 200% in 6 years, while commercial insurance has increased 29% in those same 6 years. So the quote-unquote Affordable Care Act is only affordable if there's just one subsidy on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, because the structure of the Affordable Care Act is not affordable. It's only affordable if there's more and more and more and more tax dollars sent to insurance companies to try to cover more and more and more on it. And my Democratic colleagues say we're going to keep the government closed until we even get more money on that, and we don't want to discuss anything. Well, here's the problem. We've got 200% increase for one area, 29% increase in the other, and they say just keep dumping more money into it. We absolutely know, and my Democratic colleagues have told me privately, we know there's a lot of fraud, that there's money being sent to insurance companies, that they're then covering people that actually don't even know they have coverage just because it's cheap for the insurance companies. Everybody knows that exists in it, but they don't want to discuss that. They just want to add more money into it. We have people making $250,000 a year that are getting subsidies with these additional subsidies they created several years ago. And we've said, what in the world that people making $250,000 a year are getting these subsidies? We also know the way that my Democratic colleagues created these subsidies, they went around the Hyde Amendment, which has been very clear. Federal tax dollars do not go to pay for abortions, but they created this very creative system of tax credits so they could send money to insurance companies to pay for elective abortions. They're asking every Republican now to jump on board and to be able to vote for that. Listen, there are big issues with this. My Democratic colleagues say, well, just fund more health care. Just take care of it. We know there's fraud. We know there's people making $500,000. We know there's abortion funding going. We know all these aspects. So, no, we're not just going to dump more money into it. We've said something pretty straightforward. Let's keep the government open at its current status quo. And let's keep debating all these issues. But why should next week SNAP recipients no longer get SNAP benefits? Because there's a fight over all these health care issues on this that we have very strong actual policy issues with. Why are they cutting off SNAP benefits? Why are they telling this young couple with an infant child on the way, no, neither of you are going to get paid? Why is that happening? So here's what we've done. I proposed a bill that I put out last session. It was very straightforward. This bill just says we will never have another government shutdown. Never. Every time we get to another moment like this, automatic funding kicks in, but here's the kicker. Members of Congress are in session 7 days a week, and we can't do anything but appropriations. We've got to do appropriations, and we've got to be here 7 days a week, House and Senate, until we actually get this solved. And that seems like a pretty reasonable thing. My Democratic colleagues have been bemoaning the House is not in session. If you would have voted for my bill last session, we would all be here right now negotiating this out. I had 57 votes on that last session, 57. We were 3 votes short of never, ever having a government shutdown again, never. So I'm going to bring it again and to say, let's end the potential of government shutdowns ever. And let's actually stay here and debate the issues and to be able to work things out like grown-ups. In the meantime, until we can get that done and until we can get my Democratic colleagues to agree, my colleague Ron Johnson has brought forward a very simple proposal. Let's pay the people that are working. Like this young couple that I mentioned, they're still working, both of them. Let's pay them while they're working, while we continue to be able to negotiate this out. If you won't at least open the government, as we have the last 13 times when we got to this moment, and just have a continuing resolution, at least pay the people that are working. This is a baby step and an offer to our Democratic colleagues to say, let's at least do the minimum on this to not punish those folks. There are folks today that are on the road working for the federal government that are in critical positions that they're not being paid, and they're actually putting their expenses on their credit card, not knowing if they're going to get a chance to pay that off. It's not right. So let's take the steps. My recommendation is, long-term, let's never have a shutdown ever again. Let's fix the process. We were 3 votes short last session. Let's actually fix that permanently. Let's get us back open again. But at a minimum, let's at least, while we're arguing, pay federal workers that are still at the task. That should be the easiest threshold to be able to step over. Me and my colleagues are on the floor today because we want to get a chance to be able to offer this to our Democratic colleagues and say, we're going to reach an olive branch out to you. Let's get started on some things. So I yield the floor to my colleagues.